It's showtime.
And with the exception of that, we'll have a cold opening this evening because, once again, somehow or another, the little audio player has forgotten everything that I put into it. Hey, hi, this is the Horn. It is Monday, the 4th day of March, 2019, and like I said, we've got a cold opening here. Never a dull moment. Let's see. Let me just do this real quick. Pop over into the chat room, see who's already hanging out there. Hi, I'm Bob Kincaid. What a weekend. And I don't mean that in a good way. It's Moran Monday, so I plan to. There's Sparky, who has folded space to become Man Cave this evening. If you pick out a screen name and a password over at headon.live and click on chat room, you'll be greeted by Anatole and Jimmy and Squeaky and more to come. And yes, longtime inveterate, indefatigable veteran chat room moderator Sparky has indeed folded space to become Man Cave. Give us some eating flamin' hot Cheetos for Moran Monday. Give us some flamin' hot Morans, Bob. And yeah, I got a bunch of them. Oh God Almighty, have I got a bunch of them? And they're all over the place. The one thing they share in common, of course, is their Republican-ness. Let's see here. Let's do this right. Yeah, there's that. And we'll, okay. Then we'll do this. And we'll get things going as they should be. No, that's not it. There we go. That might be it. Yeah, there it is. We're cooking with gas now. Well, we might be. Actually, we're heating with gas. It's kind of brisk here in the fabulous Horn Studio. We've got a toasty 56 degrees, snow on the ground today, some ice overnight, and we'll get more in Monday going in proper form in a moment. Had a note. I love to share this kind of stuff with y'all. Had a note from our buddy Chris in the really far frozen north, up in the Northwest Territories. Subject line: Ice Road. Hi, Bob. Betcha no one's ever listened to your podcasts on an ice road. Well, now they have. Thanks for letting us know, Chris. It sort of expands the Horn Family Community Congregation is all over the place. And, of course, at the beginning of any program, we have to send out thanks. Thanks to our subscribers this evening. Thank you very kindly to Nagla. Thank you so much, Nagla. It is deeply appreciated. Thank you to Kelly, not too awfully far from here. Thanks, Kelly, for being a partial sponsor of the program. Thank you, Catherine. And thank you to Paul. And thank you very kindly to Thomas. Thank you, one and all. Remember, our subscribers, if you'd like to be one, all you got to do is run over to headon.live and click on contribute and check that little box, et cetera, et cetera. We'll deal with that further in a moment. And you can be part of the merry little band that knocks out about a week's worth of our funding each and every month. Thank you, one and all. Thanks also to Catherine, very kindly, for taking a big bite out of this evening's fundraising goal. I can happily announce that we have only $150 to go this evening. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you very much. And so maybe that'll make it a little easier, 15 at 10, 10 at 15, et cetera, et cetera. It is much, much appreciated. What's this? Poor audio on head-on. Disclaimer only on FYI Nation. Not quite sure what that means. But, oh, there's our problem. There. No, not yet. Okay, stand by. We'll get there. Never a dull moment. And let's see. And there, and there, and there. And now we're sending merrily along. I don't know why the minimum bit rate's on White Rose. God only knows. All better now. So, there. That's good. Anyway. Well, so thanks, as previously noted, to our subscribers for this day. Thank you as well to Catherine for getting us started ahead of time this evening. Like I said, we've got only $150 to go this evening to be even for the first day of the first full week of March, which did, in fact, come in like a lion. And hopefully that means that we'll begin feeling sort of spring-like come the end of March, if that old wives' tale is to be believed. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Arnold. He says, glad you're on. Well, I am too. And sometimes it seems like, it's a bit of a miracle every time it happens. But like I said, and thank you, Jeremy in Vermont, live, loud and clear on TuneIn. Appreciate it. So we will thus begin in earnest the program, shall we? Yes, do let's.
You've got to remember that these are just simple farmers. These are people of the land. You know, morons.
Hurry, 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 step right up, it's Moran Monday on the Horn. You will not believe your ears. Yes, yes, indeed. Come on over away from the Carnival Midway, where just recently you were throwing ping-pong balls at goldfish bowls in a desperate effort to take home with you a little itty-bitty baby iguana that'll turn into something about the size of a Volkswagen that might eat you in your sleep. Yes, indeed, it's Moran Monday on the Horn. And by golly, we've got them all for you here behind this thin cybernetic veil of canvas. Birthers, deathers, ninthers, tenthers, birchers, booger eaters, maggots, libertarians, Trumpansies, mainstream Republicans, whatever that means. We've got them all right here. You can't, you can't tell the Morans without a program, and this here is the program that tells the Morans. You just can't tell them much. As I mentioned only scant moments ago, if you subscribe to the Horn for about, $10 a month, you'll be parting with something not quite equal to 50 cents, more like 48 cents, less than 48 cents, friends and neighbors, for every 3-hour programming. That's how we keep it all going here, all the plates spinning on all the sticks. Yes, indeed, yes, indeed, yes, indeed. Aunts and uncles, kiddies and cousins, brothers and sisters, friends and neighbors, tell anyone and everyone about the wonders that wait behind the thin cybernetic veil of canvas that is the Moran Monday tent. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And a general advisory, as always, for anyone entering the Moran Monday tent, keep a close hand on watches, wallets, purses, bracelets, rings, necklaces, earrings. That could hurt. European-style messenger bags, and, in fact, children and small animals, including any iguanas that you may have won throwing ping pong balls at goldfish bowls, because being conservatives, the Morans can get grabby. Head for the hills or you'll be up to your armpits in Morans. And God Almighty, that may be more true this evening than it has ever been for any other Moran Monday. I get the sense that the Moran Mondays are only going to get more moranic as each and every day proceeds apace. Where on earth to begin? Great jumpin' Jehoshaphat. We could begin, say, well, CPAC is just the gift that keeps on giving. It was pure bedlam. I think there must have been a truck with blowguns and Thorazine darts waiting outside that place in National Harbor, Maryland, as the conservatives emerged after having hooted and cheered to any number of madnesses. But the greatest madness of all, friends and neighbors, awaited them with the arrival of the alleged, well, sorta, pseudo, didn't actually win the popular vote President of the United States. And this was one for the ages. Almost 2.5 hours of uninterrupted, untrammeled crazy. It wasn't so much a speech as it was a harangue, which, after all, is why one of our nicknames for Donald J. Trump is the harangutan. I can't. I'm not going to subject you to the clips. Suffice to say that he began the whole thing by coming out and humping the American flag. No, he did. Granted, the pearl clutchers and hand wringers of the multimillionaire for-profit media won't describe it that way, but if you see the video, because he wraps the flag in his arms and then begins to grind against it and rub on it. That's humping, last I checked. And once upon a time, I would have sat mouth agape watching it, just wondering how fucking nuts has our country gone, but no more. No more. That's just another day that ends in Y in Trump America. And oh, the maggots loved it. They hooted and they hollered and they cheered, and I was halfway wondering if the suit was coming off and he was going to play with himself in front of them. I swear, we're getting there. We are getting there. And in 2.5 hours, there probably weren't 3 minutes of actual fact-checkable truth. Yes, as Bill in Allentown points out there in the chat room, he desecrated the flag from what I was taught in Boy Scouts. I think desecrated is one word you can use. I think you could also say that he abused the flag. That he gratified. No, really. Words mean things. He gratified himself on the flag. Yeah, I know. The dinner hour's taking an ass beating here in the Eastern Standard Time Zone, and people in Central Mountain and Pacific right now are saying, "Oh, please, just don't ruin ours." But he did, and he claimed that he was only joking when he begged the Russians to go and find Hillary's missing emails. even though they started trying to hack in that within hours of him saying that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it wasn't a joke. But this is how do you even begin to describe something like that? I mean, I'm doing my best here, but damn. And I got the idea that a lot of people were feeling the same sort of disconnect, because among other things, and I pointed this out earlier today, the for-profit media has gone so far down the road now in a little over 2 years' time with that two-legged monstrosity sitting in the Oval Office. The bizarre, the sick, the twisted, the hateful, the weird has been, although we have complained bitterly along the way, you and I, we, normalized. I mean, there was nothing about what he did Saturday at National Harbor, Maryland, in front of CPAC that could exist within the realm of normalcy. My personal opinion is that it was entirely driven by the sense of terror he has and by the walls closing in around him, as evinced by the Cohen hearing last week, and the further hearings that are going to be had, and the fact that he knew that there are subpoenas and document requests from the House Judiciary Committee for some 60 people who have worked in and around that maladministration. And it's beginning to take its toll on him. I saw the live Twitter feed from Daniel Dale, who works for the Toronto Star. And he's a good journalist. And he must have been typing. He must have been typing faster than some of the best typists in the world. Because this wasn't one of those. It wasn't normal. It wasn't like they hand you a script and then you can write about it along the way because he's following the script on the teleprompter. I mean, just batshit crazy stuff. Like going after the Green New Deal, as Daniel Dale tweeted. He acts out a husband peering up at the sky as he attempts to watch TV, but can't because it's not windy. He says, "Darling, is the wind blowing today? I'd like to watch television, darling." And the maggots, oh, they just clapped and cheered, and they laughed and they hooted, because that there clean electricity, they don't want nothing to do with it, the maggots don't. If it ain't from burning some coal or some gas or some Earl, they don't want nothing to do with it, even if it's, cheaper by half. It just breathtakingly stupid. And 2.5 hours. What we've done together has never been done in the history, maybe, of beyond our country, the history of the world. Because of my election, we say it with a capital E. Mm-hmm. and he went wandering off down the garden path about how he beat Hillary. At one point in time, Daniel Dale observed that he doesn't drink. I don't know if that still obtains. The tweet thread was over 100 tweets long. He mocked Jefferson Davis Beauregard Sessions III, which we've been doing all along because, well, it was the right thing to do. But he seems to forget that he appointed him. And then he went after Rod Rosenstein, whom he also appointed. Went after the chairman of the Fed, whom he also appointed, demonstrating that he knew absolutely nothing whatsoever about monetary policy. He declared, we have a gentleman that likes raising interest rates in the Fed. We have a gentleman that likes quantitative tightening in the Fed. So with all of those things, with all that, we're doing great. Can you imagine if we left interest rates where they were? God almighty. There was a delusional declaration about 600,000 manufacturing jobs in the United States since he became president. Madness. It was a long speech even by Castro standards, and Castro at least made sense. Yeah, I know. Flavio asking, how many lines of Adderall do you figure he needed to get ready for 2.5 hours? Yes, Jimmy, I do mean that. Wait a minute. Here's a cowbell for Jimmy in the Great Northwest. Yes. You mean he grabbed the flag by the pole? Well, they just let you do that. I'm not sure if he had a Tic Tac first, although I wouldn't be surprised because Adderall's not very tasty. Jeremy in Vermont, climate change. Funny thing, according to 60 Minutes, there's a lawsuit filed by ballpark number 20 kids from 15 states, all different ages, about the federal government and their use of fossil fuels and CO2 emissions. The government's admitted in open court that climate change is happening, but they fought tooth and nail to stop this lawsuit and so far lost at 2 different levels, and it's believed they will lose if taken to court as of today. Yeah, the children's climate lawsuit. And then there was the weird business about, I was all alone in the White House for Thanksgiving. I was all alone in the White House for Christmas. I was all alone in the White House for New Year's, and I told Melania, go on down and enjoy yourself. And I was all alone in the White House, and I said, hey, let's go to Iraq. And then, and apparently this was a surprise to him, he doesn't realize that Iraq is still a very dangerous place. So he's on Air Force One, and they have to go dark because they're landing in Iraq, and he says, $7 trillion, and we have to fly in with no lights. I don't know, but nobody seems to know where the $7 trillion claim came from. Well, it was just something that one of the spirochetes swimming around in the stinking, fetid remains of whatever used to be his brain cooked up. I met a general. I said, what's your name? He said, Raisin, sir. I said, like the fruit? But by now you've probably heard the majority of all that. But the problem is, the only real way to describe that is to describe it as an unhinged rant that was apparently greatly enjoyed by an unhinged audience. It was breathtaking. But there's the both siderist multimillionaire for-profit media more than happy to declare it as, well, it was a lengthy speech. And it was bats flying out of the belfry crazy. Even carried over into this morning, where the blonde lady who hosts the program that I have a filthy habit of watching described it as what? Let me see here. I'll have it in a second. Oh, yeah, they had Bob Casey from Pennsylvania on. And she asked Bob Casey, well, no. Yeah, that's what it was. She described it as the president's freewheeling address. Freewheeling? Freewheeling? That's wheels completely off the wagon. And the oxen dragging the wagon through the dirt. It wasn't freewheeling. It was knucking futs. Which brings me to one of the things that I actually wanted to talk about along the way here. And by the way, Asa tells me that the stream was not up and going when at the beginning of the program. So just so everybody knows, we're trying to raise $150 tonight. Catherine already knocked out $50 of it, so we need 15 people at $10. Hey, you know what would be cool? 15 new $10 subscribers. That would be awesome. But one way or the other, we need $15. I mean, $150. 10 people at $15. 15 people at $10. See, I'm beginning to think some of that Trump crazy may be contagious. Scott in San Diego pointed Trump's 2.5-hour ramble. We're getting reports that those poor souls who provide closed captioning for the event were carried out on stretchers on Saturday and are still under observation by specialists at the Washington Hand and Wrist Injury Clinic. Once their physical injuries are treated, they'll undergo extensive psychological therapy for damage inflicted by having listened to all 2.5 hours worth of his harangue. It made me wonder. I didn't see. Did they have someone there interpreting with American Sign Language for the deaf? Because if that person had simply taken another look over at him, grabbed a bottle of hooch and upended it and signed, "Fuck this, I'm out of here," I wouldn't have a problem with them. For even more fun, Jack suggests, watching Trump give a speech on the TV box, turn on the closed captioning and see how crazy and hard to follow what he's saying is in print form. Now see, Jack is in Shreveport, Louisiana. Scott is in San Diego, and they both came to virtually the same conclusion at almost the exact same time. There is a lot of magic that takes place here. There really, really is. So back to my idea. Some things don't change. There is still precisely zero chance of the Republican Senate cooperating if the House ever gets around to impeaching him. And right now they're still gathering evidence, which is appropriate. I think there are a couple of things you could probably impeach him over without so much evidence gathering, but that's why I'm here and they're there. But even if they do a bill of impeachment, it's never going to get the 2/3 vote necessary in the Senate of the United States to remove the man from office. And as we have discussed in the past, God alone knows what he would do if he actually was impeached and convicted by the Senate. I mean, we know, for instance, that he's been reaching out to Republican senators for months now saying, well, when they impeach me, you've just got to, you're going to have to stop them there in the Senate, okay?
Okay, I can count on you, right? Right, you'll be loyal to me. I mean, you'd take a bullet for me, right? I mean, you'd go to prison to keep me out of prison, wouldn't you? You love me that much, right? And the sad, sick thing is, they do.
So impeachment is a dead letter. The 25th Amendment is also a dead letter, in large part because it requires the cooperation of Mike Pencilneck Geek. And God hasn't told him yet that it's time for him to be president. Maybe because God's waiting to see what Robert Mueller has to say about it. And so, as I sat there this weekend thinking about it, I wondered, oh yeah, I did catch that note coming from Greg. Did you see Chris Christie tell Coffee Joe they were responsible for helping to create Trump by having him on every morning during the primaries? LOL. Joe tried to weasel out of it, of course. Yeah, I did catch that. That was kind of precious. Well, we told everybody that we'd let him we'd let him on, and the only people that took us up on it was Donald Trump and Lindsey Graham called in once, completely ignoring the question of why would you do that in the first place? Why would you turn your morning drive time program into a telephone call-in program for aspiring Republican presidential candidates? But that's way too complex. Yeah, Chris Christie didn't like it because they weren't having any of his bullshit either. So, yeah, that was kind of enjoyable. Thanks for reminding me, Greg. So, impeachment, 25th Amendment, indictment of the president. Now, I've made it abundantly clear that I think the president is both indictable, triable, and convictable within the framework that was established by the Constitution. The fact that the framers were silent on it in the body of the Constitution is not proof that they didn't think it could be done. It's proof that they didn't think anybody would actually think it couldn't be done in a system that was set up where all people were equal in the face of the law. And so that'll have to be tested by a Supreme Court in which the latest member added to it was added, as noted, specifically because he had written that the president is above the law and could murder and rape and commit arson even in front of law enforcement officers who can arrest somebody that they witness perpetrating a felony. He could do it in front of them. They couldn't arrest him. That's Brat Kavanaugh, who likes beer. And at that point, it sort of feels like we've exhausted all the potential remedies, doesn't it? It really does. So then what? Well, that's when the little light went on for me. And I guess it would create a constitutional crisis of some sort. Not that we're not already in one, and have been in one since January the 20th, 2017. And frankly, it's been an unacknowledged constitutional crisis every time we've gotten a president who was not elected by the popular vote, who was instead installed in office as a result of the operation of a slavery-driven constitutional anachronism, the Electoral College. But I got to thinking back about my own personal history. I don't mean, once upon a time, I had to deal with things called mental hygiene exams. That's what we call them in West Virginia. Some places they call it a mental status exam. Other places they call it an involuntary commitment exam. But the bottom line with any of them is that whatever state you're in, whatever jurisdiction you're in, they aren't criminal proceedings. There is no criminal charge of you are mentally ill, therefore go to jail. There's no criminal jeopardy that attaches in a mental status exam. And I would hazard a guess, although I did not check every state, but I would hazard a guess that every state and territory has a similar statute, because you just kind of have to. And most of these statutes are predicated on a couple of things. A two-tiered, two-factor test. In West Virginia, it goes something like this. Is the person addicted to alcohol or drugs or suffering from some other mental illness? And if the answer to that question is yes, you move to the second part of the test, and that is, as a result of the addiction to alcohol or drugs, or the mental illness generally, is the person a threat to himself or others? And you'd be surprised how broad that inquiry can get. For instance, a person who suffering from some sort of mental illness, let's say you've got someone who is a type 1 brittle diabetic, or type 2 brittle diabetic, I don't care. But they also have a mental illness, or maybe they're just saying, fuck it, and they decide to just drink nonstop and not take their insulin, and the family members can't do anything about it. So they go to the mental hygiene commissioner, and the mental hygiene commissioner says, well, hell yeah, I'll grant that petition. And so he issued, or she, a pickup order, and the sheriff's deputies usually go and pick up the person, bring them in, and you have a hearing. The person has a lawyer. Usually the prosecutor's office is on the other side, and the point is proving those factors that I just mentioned a minute ago. In that case, it would be, well, this person appears to be addicted to alcohol. And you'll have an examining doctor there who does the examination, appears to be suffering from addiction to alcohol or mental illness, and because of that isn't taking their insulin and is therefore a danger to himself. At which point the person can be involuntarily committed for that person's own safety. There has to be a similar statutory setup in the District of Columbia. There's no way that there isn't one. So take a minute to think about that. I'll wait. No, I won't. And by the way, the 2.5-hour screed, now I'm guessing here, but it's an educated guess. Remember when he was rambling in the Rose Garden? Sounds like a song title, doesn't it? Rambling in the Rose Garden. Remember when he was rambling in the Rose Garden a couple of weeks ago over the national emergency declaration? And he said,
gosh, that Rush Limbaugh, boy, he sure can talk. He's some kind of talent. He can talk for 3 hours without taking a call. I mean, other people take calls, but he could do 3 hours. That's amazing. It's unbelievable.
I think when he says things like that, they begin to prey on the remnants of his mind. And so by the time he's walking out on stage Saturday at CPAC, he's got it in his head that he has to show that he's as good at that as Rush Limbaugh.
I mean, Rush has commercials. But I talked without commercials for more than 2 hours and 20 minutes. I'm fantastic. It's unbelievable how good I am.
Granted, speculation on my part, but we've seen this kind of behavior in action before. And you know, it's not mentally healthy. But here's the thing. With the failure of all the other constitutional structures, and they have failed, they are already failed. If the House impeaches him at some point, it will die in the Senate. Any trial, if Mitch McConnell allows one to take place, will be a sham and a fraud. Because Mitch has his marching orders. So impeachment's out. The 25th Amendment is out, not just for lack of Mike Pencilneck Geek, but for lack of anybody with any kind of starch in their backbone to care enough about the United States of America to remove an obviously mentally ill president from the levers of power before he can, say, blow up the planet. Remember, the 25th Amendment was ratified into the Constitution during the Cold War. In fact, it was ratified not too awfully long after America and the world were captivated by a pair of films, maybe a trio of films. One of them, of course, was Dr. Strangelove. The other one was Failsafe. And then, I'm not sure if it was before or after the ratification of the 25th Amendment, but On the Beach. The people who ratified the 25th Amendment understood very well the absolute necessity that the President of the United States in a nuclear world be in complete possession of his or her physical and mental faculties and be fit to discharge the duties of the office. The proof of it is in the fact that it has been used in the past. Every time some doctor at Walter Reed got out the steel eel to cram it up old 666 Ronald Wilson Reagan's fundament, the 25th Amendment was triggered. And while he was in La La Land getting some polyps cut out of his colon, George H.W. Bush was effectively the acting president of the United States. But we've never seen a scenario like this. Never. There was, toward the end of old 666 Ronald Wilson Reagan's second term, there were rumblings that he had turned out that he had shown up in the second term a couple of Sammys shy of a picnic, but nobody did anything because there were enough political norms in place that people could keep things going without having to take such admittedly drastic measures. We're way past that now. And so what I'm asking you to think about, and I'm mentioning this because it's another one of those occasions where we're talking about things here that the multimillionaires of the for-profit media haven't even gotten anywhere close to. What if a mental hygiene exam is the only thing standing between the United States of America and a complete presidential meltdown. Well, for purposes of this conversation, let's try to work through it. The respondent would be Donald J. Trump, the President of the United States. The allegation would be that he suffered from either some addictive process and or a mental illness, and dementia and Alzheimer's disease and senility all qualify. I think competent evidence could be put on. Hell, maybe you even bring the guy in who talked about all the times he saw him snorting rails of Adderall. By the way, I noticed a screen cap from Saturday as well. Dude's nose was Yeah, okay, we're near it. Yeah, sorry, Central Time Zone. I'm going to screw your dinner, too. He had a clear mucus runny discharge coming out of his nose. Not saying. Just saying. And so we would then move to the second phase of the inquiry. If he is indeed addicted to a drug or mentally ill, is he a danger to himself or others? That might prove to be such a seemingly obvious that it could be screwed up. But you'd have to put on proof of the Adderall. Then you'd have to have, and again, remember, a mental status exam comes with this. So some doctor would examine him, not the White House doctor, not Candyman, not the guy who thinks that he's going to live to be 200 years of age. None of those quacks. A real live forensic psychiatrist from one of the many fine hospitals in the Washington, D.C. area. And it would be based on that interview. It would be based on his statements. It would also be based on statements he's made in the past. No. Randy in PA asks, wouldn't a mental health doctor be a government employee whom Trump could fire at any time? No. There's plenty of private practicing forensic psychiatrists in Washington, D.C. So maybe this comes off. I recognize that it's a reach. But what would happen? Am I missing something out there? Is there a constitutional provision that I didn't notice all the other times that I've read the Constitution? The president, because remember, the Constitution was written by people who had no real concept of mental health whatsoever because the field didn't exist in 1787. Originalism. Well, we can't be talking about the president having mental illness because the framers didn't know about mental illness, and there was no such thing as mental health, and originalism says we have to let him keep being crazy in office until he gets us all killed. Because that's the other part of it. Is he a danger to himself or others? He is a danger to every living, breathing, eating, excreting, secreting thing on this planet. There are insensible creatures in the furthest depths of the ocean where light never intrudes, who don't know it, but he's a danger to them. He's a danger to giraffes loping along on the African savanna. He's a danger to polar bears in the Arctic. He's a danger to the great, mighty denizens of the deep the whales, what few are left, swimming around the oceans. He's a danger to your dog. He's a danger to my cats. But more importantly, he is a danger to every human being on the planet. Young, old, male, female, anywhere on the spectrum in between, non-binary, he is a threat to them. He's even a threat to his own family. Because his felonious behavior has been sufficient that it could eventually wind up wiping out the Trump fortune. And then poor little Ivanka would actually have to go out and get a job. Wouldn't you love to see her taking orders at the Waffle House? See, Darlene in Connecticut's out there. Yeah, you know where I'm going, don't you? Darlene writes, you're right, though, Bob. The 25th is a literary clusterfuck. But someone ought to clue in D. Trump that it may hold the key to his way out. He remains the inactive president while Pence is acting president. But I don't think D. Trump could contain himself and not butt in with acting President Pence. Trump would have to be expected to vacate the White House in Washington, D.C. Ew, that was a runny nose? Yuck. I was trying to temper being grossed out too much by thinking it was sweat, which is still disgusting, but not as disgusting as, Trump snot. Well, when you put it that way, it just gets even more so, Darlene. Here's the other thing, though. If he was adjudged to be suffering from mental illness, that would be an adjudicative finding by a court of competent jurisdiction, which might go a long way to saving his ass if he left office and, say, the Southern District of New York or maybe Bob Mueller decided to drop 4 or 5 dozen indictment counts on him. Sorry, he's nuts. I can't explain how my mind comes up with all of these things. It's bits and pieces. It's like a jigsaw puzzle that somebody just sort of dumped out in the middle of the room, and every now and then you run across a piece. If you're lucky, you get a corner. But one of the things I was thinking about was that visual of poor Paul Manafort, who's in such desperate condition now that he has to be rolled into the courtroom in a wheelchair. By God, if you threw a bag of rubles on the floor in front of him, he'd be out of that chair and grabbing it in a minute. I mean, there are all kinds of fascinating wrinkles to this little theory. One of which is the White House wouldn't have to be consulted. Whoever the mental hygiene commissioner is, or whatever that person is called in Washington, D.C., could simply take the sworn petition and determine whether or not to issue. And if they issued it, the pickup order would then go to a law enforcement officer duly sworn who would have the ability to go and pick him up unless the Secret Service or the FBI or both of them decided to try to interfere in the workings of a duly appointed mental hygiene commissioner. By the way, it could also happen in Palm Beach County, Florida. He has a residence there. And if he was physically present in Palm Beach County, Florida, there at Mar-a-Lardass, he could be served. And once served, he has to be taken into custody, and a hearing has to be held forthwith. at least in most of the statutes that I've reviewed. That's why years and years and years ago, I'd get a call at 3 o'clock in the morning. Come on out. We caught him. Yeah, he was talking into his flashlight and telling us about how he was communicating with the CIA. Oh, come on, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. He's still going to be nuts at sunrise. No, statute says forthwith. We're forthwithin'. But the whole idea of being nuts might actually be his salvation. I know, Randy. Randy says D.C. is governed by Congress. That means there's a mental hygiene statute somewhere. A member of Congress is not the mental hygiene commissioner for D.C. D.C. has a mayor and a council and all kinds of stuff. Ah, well, okay. Scott in San Diego says, Trump's runny nasal discharge. I don't think we're going to get over this one this evening. It's the twice-daily spirochete shift change, Bob. Look it up. Yeah. Yeah, that was good. Meanwhile, Lee in New York, the things that get y'all going, I don't know. Leaking out of his nose, the nasal discharge was not because of Adderall. His brain is liquefying. It explains why when he speaks, he lacks brains usage. Yeah, I can see where the program's going. So, just a little something to think about and maybe even talk about later in the program. Did you come up with that Mara Lardass? No, that's stolen. Flavio says, I will use that going forward. Awesome. That's why I stole it. It is awesome. Mara Lardass. So, like I said, we'll maybe talk about this in some further detail if you want to engage in conversation later. But Lord, 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 in my Father's house are many morans. Hey, there's Labor Man wandering into the chat room. Good evening. Good evening, Gary. How are you? And I just realized I made a mistake insofar as I only mentioned this evening's subscribers. I need to do some extra thanking. Thank you very kindly to Gene and Ann across the pond for being partial sponsors of the program. Thank you to John as well. Thank you, John. That's Jon, John. Thanks very much to our buddy Stephen, a secret member of the Fraternity of Steve. Thanks to Janice. Thank you, Janice. And thank you to Mark. Thank you to Elizabeth. Thanks, Dave. Thank you to our buddy Reggie. Thanks as well to Rocco. Thank you all very, very kindly indeed. So we've got those thank yous out of the way. It is very much appreciated. Yeah, there it is. Thank you for being the ad hoc research department this evening. Here's a passage from a website. Like every state, District of Columbia has civil commitment laws that establish criteria for determining when involuntary treatment is appropriate for individuals with severe mental illness who cannot seek care voluntarily. There we go. And you know what? Cannot also includes the realm of will not. You can have people who have been prescribed medication that manages their mental illness quite well, but in many instances with mental illnesses, compliance is a problem. You'll get people who refuse to take their meds. So you do an involuntary on them. you get them stabilized on their meds, and back out into the public they go. I realize that what I'm talking about is it's a long shot, but we're in long shot territory. The fact that he's casting around now, looking for somebody to blame for his fuck up in Hanoi, speaks volumes. Because he can't take responsibility for his own actions, which is also kind of further proof of mental illness. And the latest, this was triggered by I forget which Republican it was during the Cohen hearing. I find it absolutely reprehensible that we're sitting here having a hearing with Michael Cohen here, and the president ain't even here to defend himself because he's in Hanoi, Vietnam, trying to make peace with the North Koreans. Utterly oblivious to the fact that Cohen had been scheduled to testify on February 7th, but couldn't because of the various and sundry threats that he and his family received, at the direction and urging of Donald Trump. That's called witness intimidation, and it is, in fact, a felony. And so now that's being repeated all over the place, including by him in the Great Unhinged Harangue. Subject line coming from Matt in San Francisco. Having some experience, having grown up with a mother who was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, the people in government seem to have forgotten a golden rule I learned very early. Don't put the mentally ill person in charge. It's fine to play along as if they're in charge, but when they're busy making Drano soup on the stove, you make sure everything of value is taken out of their name and signed over to the family members who do not suffer from mental illness. Seems simple, but apparently collectively those in positions of power don't get it. Although there's an argument maybe that they do, Matt, or at least some did. One passage making the rounds in journalistic circles today is an account of the time that Donald Trump committed an impeachable offense by trying to intervene in the merger between Time Warner and AT&T. Used to be AOL Time Warner, and then AOL the AOL part just kind of disappeared. But the Time Warner part also included CNN. And because he has a very, very tiny little hard-on for CNN, mushroom-shaped, we're told, he kept trying to get the Department of Justice to file suit and insisting to his immediate inner circle that they do so. And one account that includes, I believe, John Kelly and, he was the economic advisor. Come on. He ain't there now. He was replaced by Larry Kudlow. But they walked out of the room, and one looks at the other and says, "Don't you fucking dare do anything of what he just said. We don't do business that way." Well, that's exactly the kind of behavior that Matt in San Francisco is talking about here. You remember the story of the people who would take papers off of his desk so that he couldn't harm the country? Now, if you take the idea of being under oath and testifying seriously, and if perjury means anything to any of these people, if having a career after Donald Trump has gone to his long home means anything to them, then once under oath, they would kind of have to admit the shit that happened. Because Shirley, I know, and don't call me Shirley, 2 years plus into this maladministration, they figured out that he has no loyalty to anyone but himself. When the time comes, he will chuck Dim Sun right under the bus. He'll chuck Jared under the bus. He will, if need be, chuck Ivanka under the bus. Hell, he'd chuck Barron under the bus. If it's the difference between saving his skin and not. Jeremy in Vermont, subject line, Vietnam. When Trump flew his large orange ass over to Vietnam, the military let out a sigh of relief and said, about time, draft dodging with fake bone spurs and all. Yeah, and he still managed to get his ass kicked. Serious question coming from Flavio. Are there none among the Republicans who have any self-respect, self-regard, that they would turn and denounce Julius Geezer and his cabal? Anybody? Are they all afraid of him or his acolytes? Yes! And, the first answer is no, there aren't any. As long as their base appears, and the people who put them in office seem to be enamored of and entranced by, mesmerized by Donald Trump, they will be as maggoty as necessary. If it ever becomes a political liability, if people start getting charged with crimes who aren't Paul Manafort, who aren't Roger Stone. For instance, if somebody was to say, get hold of the RNC emails, and we understood once and for all what kind of blackmail evidence was being held over the heads of people like, say, the Precious Lindsay and my old Kentucky homeboy, Mitch McConnell, and they were taken down, then maybe, just maybe, the rats might start making their way to the railings of the ship as it took on water. So that, and again, that ain't all. Lots and lots of morans. But someone is on hold. Let us find out who. Hey, welcome to the program.
It's your friend from Connecticut, Darlene.
Oh, Darlene. What a joy. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm pretty good. Thank you for bearing with me while I put the finishing touches on all of that madness.
No problem. I think you might be talking about Gary Cohn.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, National Economic Council Director Gary Cohn is apparently working on a memoir. So here's another one that's going to be writing about his time in the White House with you know who. Yeah,
his time down the rabbit hole and sitting there passing the cyanide pastries at the Mad Hatter's Tea Party.
Exactly. So getting back to the 25th Amendment, I have my little, handy-dandy, trusty little Constitution here in a book form, which was given to me by my two little pups, now retired veterinarian, who he was nuts, and he was handing these out. He's like a libertarian, but claims he's a constitutionalist. And I hate to admit that this little book was issued by the Cato Institute, which kind of grosses me out. But I've been cross-checking it with online with the Constitution. It seems like they have it exactly as it should be. But looking at the amendment, the 25th Amendment. It seems to typify what our founding fathers did. It's always kind of circuitous, or it always goes back to the president. So it comes back to him to indicate whether or not he isn't nuts,
Right.
Which,
So, yeah, there's the letter, and the vice president has to sign it that says the president is nuts. And then the president gets to write back, no, I'm not. And then the vice president gets to write back, yes, you are, yes, you are. And then it goes to Congress.
Right. Well, there's an interesting line in here. And, of course, to me, it seems like if they work up the nerve to do it the first time, he's going to flip out and rant, and Trump is. Would they have the guts to do it the second time? And there's a weird little line in here that I kind of don't understand, where it says that so it says, thereafter, when the president transmits to the president pro tempore, is that how you tempore, of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives his written declaration that no inability exists, he shall resume the powers and duties of his office unless the Vice President and a majority of either the principal offices of the executive department or of such other body as Congress may by law provide.
Yep.
Transmit within 4 days to the President pro tempore of the Senate and Speaker their written declaration the President is still nuts. So what is this? What I don't get is, what is this such other body as Congress may by law provide? It almost sounds like they're throwing it in Congress's court too. So what if you have like a dueling situation where,
Well, Darlene, I've always read that as meaning that if the Congress wanted to set up a commission on presidential disability, that they would be within their rights so to do.
But it would have to probably be by approval of both houses, right?
And it would have to be signed into law by the president.
So it still goes back to him, which, again, if our founders did our founders actually contemplate somebody who could be certifiable? Because if that's the case, then why do they keep putting it back in his lap?
Well, first of all,
when they say inability, what do they mean by inability?
Well, first of all, all of that language is 1960s language.
Right. Okay,
so like I said early on, the concept of madness was just about it. By 1787, I think Bedlam, from whence we get the general term, existed as a madhouse in England, and we didn't have any of the differential diagnostic tools for determining, is it organic, is it chemical, and the truth be told, and this isn't me approving or disapproving of anything. Most of the people who founded who framed and executed and ratified the Constitution were drunks, because you couldn't drink the water. And so they were, I read this a few years ago, they were knocking out a couple of gallons of wine apiece a day or beer. And some of them were chasing it with laudanum shooters. I mean, I'm not kidding. Look at
No, I believe you. I totally
look at the inventory, just to give you an idea of at the time. Look at the inventory of the Corps of Discovery, Lewis and Clark, heading out, up the Missouri River. They had barrels of beer, barrels of whiskey, gallons of laudanum. And for anybody who doesn't know, laudanum is basically an opium syrup in alcohol. Imagine.
And they had to drink that shit fast, Bob, because it would go bad. Because I think basically, I don't know if this is apocryphal or not, but the whole thing about IPAs, which was to jack up the hops and the alcohol content so that the beer would be preserved, because it wouldn't make it.
Right. It was an India Pale Ale, because by cranking it through the roof with hops, it had a fighting chance of making it all the way to India from a brewery in England.
Exactly. So not only were they major boozers, they had to drink this shit fast before it went bad. That's what I'm thinking so.
Yeah.
They were pretty weighty.
And so they had no operating conception of mental illness beyond plain madness. And so they were,
Right, so they didn't, yeah.
and generally speaking, it was a small enough country at that point in time that you weren't going to let an absolute Lulu into the Oval Office. And back then, they still were operating under the self-deluding fantasy that the Electoral College, per Alexander Hamilton, would save us from any similar. So they didn't worry about it because they didn't think they had to worry about it. I think there are, and then there are moments through history as the country grows up. Garfield, the assassination of James Garfield, in which that poor man languished in bed being killed not by an assassin's bullet, but by a series of quack doctors, provided, and the assassination of Lincoln, because the original Constitution was not clear exactly how the succession worked. And then it comes to a head with Woodrow Wilson's stroke, when his wife essentially, in conspiracy with some other politicians, effectuates a coup, and she won't let anybody near Woodrow Wilson. And
we saw a similar situation with Ronald Reagan and Nancy.
And Thomas Riley Marshall of Indiana was the vice president at the time, and the Congress came to him and begged him to take over the presidency. And he said, I will be happy to do it, because he was a lawyer, and not a bad one. He said, I will be happy to do it the minute you pass a statute that says I can, because I can't see where I can in the Constitution. And he wasn't being a dumbass. But that's one of those hinges, one of those cruxes in history, Darlene, because he has been cited by some historians, and it's a brutal accusation, but he has been cited as the man who made World War II happen, because Wilson had been so hard-nosed and so damnably rude to Henry Cabot Lodge about the League of Nations treaty, that Henry Cabot Lodge says, I don't care if you bring it to me with roses and chocolates. It ain't getting out of the Senate. But Thomas Riley Marshall had considerably more experience working with Congress, and they said, if you'll we might be able to get the League of Nations treaty through. And if the and the argument goes that if the League of Nations treaty had gone through, you don't get Hitler and you don't get the Second World War. But obviously that's a parlor game for people with elbow patches on their jacket sleeves. But that was horrifying, and they kept saying, we need to do something about this. We need to do something about this. Then FDR drops dead, and they said, oh, okay, well, obviously Harry Truman has to be president. Okay. And then Kennedy gets killed. And the big bright line difference between before the Kennedy assassination and after the Kennedy assassination was the nearness that most people did not know, Darlene, of all-out nuclear holocaust in the wake of the assassination of John Kennedy. Because there were people who said, this is obviously the Russians. I think we ought to launch. And so the 25th Amendment finally gets ratified during the presidency of LBJ, because they had kicked the can down the road so far and for so long, and in a nuclear-armed world, they realized that they couldn't just improvise anymore. And so that's that. What is that? Is that paragraph 4 in the 25th Amendment? That's what they came up with. And that language,
Section 4.
Yeah, and that language about such or such group as Congress may by law provide. Well, it's another case of Congress doing as little as it can to keep drawing its breath and its pay, because what that's a hint of, at least as I read it, is that there should be a commission on presidential fitness.
Right.
And you've got.
Yeah. Go ahead, sorry.
No, you please.
Well, what this is bringing to mind to me right now is the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders.
4th edition.
Which I guess is in its 5th edition.
Oh, are we up to the 5th now?
I guess it's a 2013 update, and I'm trying to find out when the original one came out. Was it even in existence at the time of the 25th during LBJ? And I can't seem to find any information on that. But even the DSM has, even they say that there's certain things within the DSM that they really can't pin down, like personality disorder, which I clearly think
right. So straight up schizophrenia has become. It was schizophrenia in the DSM-3, and now in the DSM-4 or 5, it's schizoaffective disorder.
Yeah, personality affective disorder, personality dysfunction. Oh God!
And for people who've never fooled with it, there are axes, AXES,
yes,
and different things appear on different axes. And you're supposed to make your differential psychiatric diagnosis based upon where people fall on these various axes, axis 1, axis 2, axis 3, etc. And that's how you come up with a viable diagnosis. I'm not a psychiatrist, and I do not play one on the radio, but once upon a time it was necessary for me to learn how to read this shit. And so based on the number of practicing mental health professionals who have opined in recent years on his lack of mental health, I can't help but think that if they didn't get to dummy up the inquiry by using a ringer physician like Candyman, who shouldn't be allowed to do it in the first place because he's not a mental health professional, then we might actually learn that he's not okay. And once you learn that he's not okay, then it becomes a matter. I mean, look, if they're going to accuse us, and they have, Darlene, of trying to plot his overthrow by the 25th Amendment, let's have the conversation. Could the guy withstand a mental status exam? I don't think he could for 5 or 10 minutes. I mean, he'd fall apart.
It depends on who's administering it, too.
Right. As long as there's no ringer.
Medical doctor.
Right. I mean, I think he'd fall apart faster than Captain Quigg did with the ball bearings on the stand in the Caine Mutiny.
Well, I did find something here at the blurb, and I don't want to click into the link because the blurb will disappear. But it said how the DSM developed what you might not know. In 1917, the Bureau of the Census embraced a publication called the Statistical Manual for the Use of Institutions for the Insane. It was created by the Committee on Statistics of the American Medico-Psychological Association, now the American Psychiatric Association. And it goes on. So it was in existence at the time, of Lyndon B. Johnson and the creation of the 25th. But it's interesting because when you read it, it seems very generalized. His written declaration that he is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, and then they talk about it being like inability. So
and part of that language, part of that language, I think stems because I left one out in the post in the after the bomb, the nuclear age. And that was Eisenhower's heart attacks.
Mm-hmm. Right, and then of course FDR, who died in office.
Right, but FDR is pre-nuke, Eisenhower's post-nuke.
Exactly. Yes.
And so I think you're right. I think they left it somewhat vague because anytime you get into a hardcore list of, or a list of red letter elements, you're going to have arguments as to whether or not the proof is sufficient to meet that red letter, the requirements of that red letter element. You see what I'm saying? So if you start coming up with a list of diseases, and then, for instance, as in the case of the DSM, the name of the disease changes, you're screwed.
Right. So is this more focused on physical infirmity as opposed to mental?
I would not be surprised if it was, because up until that point, I think even the people who ratified the 25th Amendment could not conceive, and this goes back. See, Darlene, a lot of these conversations loop back on themselves.
Well, it would also explain why it keeps going back to the president. If he's nuts, I would think that the 25th would have some sort of accommodation for that, or to take that into consideration, because somebody who's crazy probably isn't going to admit they're crazy. You know what I mean? So maybe this was focused more on the physical infirmity. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just saying that some of these other conversations, the conversations merge, and I'm trying to think of what it was that I was thinking of at the moment. But in the case of, I know what it was. At the time that the 25th was ratified, I don't think we'd ever had a president who was 70 years old when he left office. And so nobody was sweating senile dementia. Alzheimer's disease, I don't think, had been identified as such at the time of the ratification of the 25th. And there was still this faith that Republicans and Democrats, while they had differences of opinions, were all going in a vehicle in the same direction toward the same bright future. The operative goal in 1965 or 1966 or 1967 was that every generation would make America a little bit better for the next generation coming. It's as close as we've ever gotten to the Haudenosaunee idea of the 7 generations to be taken into consideration. So they and I think it's fair that they made that assumption, because the way our politics operated, a straight-up lunatic couldn't get there. But then, within a few scant years of the passage of the 25th, ratification of the 25th, you've got Richard Nixon walking barefoot drunk on pills through the White House, talking alternately to either Henry Kissinger or a random portrait hanging on the wall.
Yeah.
And apparently everybody knew it, and they were kind of covering it up. So you get rid of Nixon, he's still out the door before he's 70. But in 1976, with an incumbent Republican in office, Ronald Reagan mounted a primary challenge to Gerald Ford. And he came very close to beating Ford for the Republican nomination. And that told him that if Ford lost, or even if Ford won, that he was going to be the front runner for 1980. And again, I guess I'll get more hate mail. I can't believe you get engaged in that kind of ageism, Bob Kincaid, goddammit. But Reagan was the one who broke the tradition, the unstated tradition that we had of not having ancient people in the presidency. And yet, Ronald Reagan leaving office, falling apart, Darlene, was younger than at least 2 and maybe 3 people vying for the Democratic nomination for president. And I maintain that that is not a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the counter argument to that would be it depends on the person. On the flip side, I see your point completely. It's nerve-wracking for us as the electorate to be worried about this. But of course,
well, and the other counter argument I've been presented with is that, well, and for some reason, everybody always leaps immediately to Bernie. They don't say anything about Biden.
Or
but
Warren.
Right. But I trust Bernie. Bernie's healthy. Bernie's very active. Bernie's vigorous. I mean, Bernie's got energy to burn. See what I did there? Bernie's got energy to and I have faith that Bernie will choose a great vice president who will be able to carry forward with his agenda. And at that point in time, Darlene, I tend to say, wow, you're young, aren't you?
Yeah.
Because no one seems to... our buddy Scott in San Diego, for instance, speaks eloquently about what it felt like when Kennedy was assassinated. And Scott was a kid.
Indeed.
Scott was a kid.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a sister who was 15 years old when Kennedy was assassinated. She's in her 70s now. Okay? So when somebody says, well, he'll pick a good vice president and he'll just pick up where we live. No. When a president dies in office, this country goes into a convulsion. Yeah. And nobody seems to remember that. And certainly there's nobody out there who can remember how terrifying it was when Ike had his heart attack. And so,
or FDR when he died in office during the war.
Yeah, he was so old. I mean, he was so sick. He looked so old. He was a young man.
Yes.
I mean, truly.
He was very vigorous. He was very vigorous, before, well, I don't think he had polio, but that's a whole other issue. But,
whoa, wait a minute, what? Wait, what? You can't just throw that out on the table and walk away, Darlene.
My clinical doctor thinks he had FSH, which is what I have, which is often mistaken as polio. And I've watched hours and hours of whatever limited video they have of him trying to walk, and he seems to show signs of it being that, because the fact that he got it so late in age, usually it was considered an infant's disease, and he was still able to ambulate somewhat. He needed support and help, but he may have actually had a muscular degenerative disease. And my clinical doctor, who is brilliant, has said that to me. He said, I don't think he had polio. I think he had a form of muscular dystrophy, FSH, which they didn't really know a lot about.
Because I remember reading him a young person's biography of him when I was a little boy, and what always stuck in my mind was the portrayal that they gave of, one day he went swimming and was all vigorous, and the next day he couldn't walk, and it was polio.
Well, FSH is facioscapulohumeral muscular dystrophy. They thought it pretty much was limited to the upper part of the body, but over the years, many years after he died, and even when I was diagnosed in 1981, they thought it was limited to the upper body, but they discovered that it affects all the muscles. And when I see him ambulate, he tends to lean into his back, which is what we do. I think it's called labradosis or something. It's where we try to get our center of balance. And he had the sloping shoulders and kind of the protrusive stomach, and he seems that there's signs there that
I wonder if
might
there,
have been something.
but isn't there? Isn't there a genetic component to something like that?
Yes, there's a genetic component to FSH, absolutely. hmm So it would be interesting to see if he has any descendants or any other members of his family that were alive at the same time he was, if they were showing any signs of that. But it was misdiagnosed in my family. My maternal grandmother had it, and she was diagnosed as having polio, and that was wrong. They didn't discover it with my maternal grandmother till I was diagnosed. And then they looked back in the history and said, we don't think she had polio. We think she had FSH. So F as in Frank. So
Yeah.
Basically who knows? He could be wrong. My clinical doctor could be wrong, but he's a very smart man, and it's intrigued me. It's always intrigued me as to whether or not, did he really have it? Because even, it's interesting because even Eleanor Roosevelt kind of bashed him a little bit on this, because she's like, well, this infant's disease that he has. And it's just very odd that a man, who was very vigorous, I remember seeing, I think when he ran for governor of New York, he bounded up those steps like there was nothing wrong with him. This was when he was much younger, and then all of a sudden, I don't know if it necessarily happened overnight, but it seems odd to me that it happened late in life. Water therapy is very good for people with FSH, it just seems as though just the physical correlations are interesting between, and it probably was very mild to moderate, whatever he had, if it wasn't polio. But that was the disease at the time, and it seemed like everything was being diagnosed as that. And don't forget, we're seeing something now with the children out west that are being diagnosed with degenerative muscular. They can't explain it. This was making news a few months back. But it sounds like a sudden onset of FSH. They can't figure out what it is. I don't know if you remember those reports. But the children were losing their mobility and their limbs were being affected.
Yes.
So, yeah. And FSH can have a quick onset, and it can happen in your 20s, or it can happen when you pop out of the womb. It can happen in your teens around puberty like it did for me, and it can even happen in your 50s. Because my cousins who are from the same maternal grandmother, one of my cousins, it's kind of quick. It's been happening to him as he hit his mid-50s. So the onset varies, and there are members of my family that show no signs of it whatsoever. My siblings show no signs, nothing. Yet I have it, and my two cousins on the other side have it, and it's very asymmetrical and it's very random.
That is absolutely fascinating. I mean, the things I learn on this program.
It is fascinating. But anyway, that's FDR, and and again, it doesn't affect the span of your life because he lived pretty late into life. It sounds to me like he had his wits about him, but his body failed him. But it doesn't affect your length of life. It affects your quality of life. Although there are rare instances when the disease can affect your heart. It's rare, and it can also affect your esophagus, where you can't swallow. Which, if I can't eat, kill me now.
Yeah.
Forget it.
And you said he lived fairly late in life. I don't know how you define that. But he was 63 when he died.
Oh, I didn't know that. I thought he was in his 70s or 80s. Okay.
No, he looked like
that's
he was.
Young. Yeah. Oh, okay. So that's still fairly young.
And then
I'm wondering if he had a heart issue, because that would be interesting, because that could be the rare instance when it affects the heart. That'd be interesting to know what did he die of? I mean, what did he succumb to? Do you know? I really don't know much about that part.
And Eisenhower, just for those of us who are keeping track of this kind of stuff, Dwight David Eisenhower didn't quite make it to 79 years old.
Okay,
but the thing is, he had his heart attack in office when he was, let's see, roughly 63, 64, 65. So,
right. So I think what you're saying is that that the stresses of the office could lead to an early. I see what you're getting at.
I mean, anybody can go at any time. I mean, in the news today, the sad death of Luke Perry.
Yeah, that was shocking. He's only 52. He's a year younger than me.
Yeah.
Yep. I'm trying to find out let's see, Roosevelt, what he succumbed to here. But
yeah, I'm looking too.
Franklin Delano, a paralytic illness. So he was 39 years old, time of nowhere in New York. Is this the?
I have a.
I want to go.
I have a terrific.
Okay,
he declared, "I have a terrific headache," and then slumped over.
Oh, so maybe an aneurysm.
Right.
Oh, God. Yeah, poor guy. Okay.
But the larger point is that I really do think there's a difference between the pre-nuclear world and the post-nuclear world, and the reason that I just to sort of reestablish what we were talking about, I don't think that the people who ratified the 25th Amendment ever imagined that there would be a mental health issue in the presidency, because
I agree.
Because the vetting process had been up to that point in time fairly rigorous. That the parties would notice, and what happened is again with the rise of Reagan, I remember him saying, well, I won't hold Senator Mondale's youth against him, Mommy. And but the fact of the
you also have to take.
He also said.
Take into account.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that he also said he promised that if he ever felt like he was slipping, he'd quit. The problem with that is once you've slipped, you don't know you're gone.
How do you quit? Right, you don't have the faculties to.
And you've got a whole bunch of flacks and hacks and flunkies around you who are deeply invested in you being there.
Correct.
And so
you also
that norm gets shattered. Go ahead.
Take into account too the overall attitude about psychology and insanity and therapists and psychologists and psychiatrists. There's this attitude that they're kooks, that kind of thing. It wasn't considered an exact science, or it was kind of frowned upon as.
Well, remember the break-in at Daniel
Daniel
Ellsberg's psychiatrist? They were going to use his mental health records to try to discredit Daniel Ellsberg over the Pentagon Papers.
Ooh, I did not know that.
And so even here in the waning years of the second decade of the 21st century, there's considerable stigma that attaches itself to mental illness.
Correct. Yep.
And we sitting here saying knuck and futz and crazy and lunatic and things like that, we're not helping. But how do you talking compassionately about mental illness in general is different from talking about mental illness in somebody. Well, it's like that line from Gary Jennings' book Aztec that I keep referencing. Are you Tlahuele or merely Xolopitli? Which means, are you homicidally insane, criminally insane, or just delightfully mad? And that, we're not seeing eccentricity. You can be eccentric and not be certifiable, even if there are some aspects of it that probably do have some sort of an etiology to it. I think that's the right word. But in the case of Trump, we are seeing a malignant level of mental illness. And one of the things I was going to mention a few minutes ago, Darlene, is that, remember there was that standard for mental health professionals that said, no, we're not going to be diagnosing anybody that we're not treating. And that was an official policy of the American Psychiatric Association for eons.
Bullshit. That's bullshit. They call it a differential diagnosis. They can do it from afar. I don't buy that, but go ahead.
Well, it came about as a result of the nearest thing we ever had to a probably certifiably insane candidate for the presidency, Barry Goldwater. And that it was called the Goldwater Rule. Well, with Trump's arrival in the White House, all of a sudden they took they took a second look at it and said, no, I think it's okay. I think it's okay to say he's nuts.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
And so
that's called the differential diagnosis. Even though they actually have not seen the person face to face, or actually they have them in the same room and they do the examinations, they call it a differential diagnosis. There are some pretty reputable doctors and psychiatrists that have said, we think there's something wrong with him.
Oh, approaching 30
yeah.
or more. And the and then the other part of this that I really didn't delve into deeply is the question of how do you serve the pickup order?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I mean, can you imagine you're a detective with the Capitol Police and you show up at the White House and, pardon me, I've got a pickup order for the president?
Yeah, that's
because if you're the Secret Service on the other side of the gate, suddenly you're in a conundrum. You are tasked by oath with protecting the life of the President of the United States, but you got a guy on the other side of the fence saying the President is a danger to himself and others. Your first oath is to the Constitution, not the President.
Right. What do you do? Yeah. Right.
I mean, I'm
you're
just
saying the Secret Service. You're saying the Secret Service officer's first oath is to the Constitution, not the President.
I'm pretty sure.
So that it would seem clear to me what they would have to do, but that doesn't mean they're going to do it.
And it only takes one to pull his pistol and think otherwise.
Right.
I mean, I'm not trying to scare people, Darlene, but I'm trying to point out how grave this situation really is.
Yeah, it's Kobayashi Maru. It really is.
And so if you come back from the pickup order and the examining doc says, "Oh yeah, he's a few bulbs shy of a chandelier," and at that point in time, see, here's the I spent a lot of time on this weekend. It was not healthy. But you know,
Bob, you're going to go nuts yourself.
You know what they do to your mind in law school.
Oh yes, they completely rejigger your synapses and brain patterns. Yes. Because
see, here's the thing: if the pickup order gets done, and the examining doc gives a report that he is non compos mentis, then the 25th Amendment is triggered automatically. We're not in Section 4 anymore.
But it still depends on, what do you mean triggered automatically?
Well,
his cabinet's going to do.
No. But here, let me pull up the text. I always look for. You got to be so careful because there's so many right-wing websites out there.
Exactly. That's why I cross-check this Cato Institute.
And I always go to the leak. I always go to L2, the Cornell law site.
Okay.
Because it seems like it's pretty straightforward. So Section 3 is that whenever the President transmits to the President pro tempore and the Speaker of the House, he's unable to discharge the powers and duties off, until it does, to the contrary, powers and duties shall be discharged by the Vice President as acting President. Mm-hmm. Whenever there's okay, Section 1 just says, in the case of the removal of the president from office or of his death or resignation, the vice president shall become president. Well, does a competent medical finding of non compos mentis effectively, constructively remove him from office? And so you're just in Section 1? And so you're just in Section 1, and Pence is the president, whether he likes it or not?
I would have taken that to be impeachment, related to impeachment. Would be my first.
Well, it says removal.
In case of the removal, if you want to separate it out, I mean, that's an interesting read of it. In other words, in case of removal, does it actually? I know we're getting really lawyer-like here.
Well, no, but I mean, but this is the kind of
this. The removal. Yeah.
I mean, I don't have my jacket with the elbow patches on, but this is actually kind of serious stuff. And one of the reasons I think it's serious, and maybe it marks me as as just a fantasist, but it is something that no one else is talking about. I mean, I read on this topic pretty consistently, and everybody is either limited to 25th Amendment or impeachment. And so what got me this weekend after I watched that fucking speech, which wasn't the harangue, was, and again, I find it helpful to think in terms of absurd, reductio ad absurdums. What would you do? What would you if he had walked out on stage and gone further than just humping the flag? And I'm sorry, I'm not trying to. He's done that more than once. Yeah, I'm not trying to be gross here, but if he had unzipped his fly and masturbated with it, which I think he was a goddamn single neuron away from doing. I mean, one last spirochete jumped out. No, let's not do this just yet.
Could that be crossing the line? Yeah, no, yeah. Would that have been enough?
I mean, if he takes his clothes off and stands there naked as the day he is born and harangues, does anybody? I mean, really? I'm not trying to be. Okay, it comes across maybe a little bit funny, Darlene, but I'm not trying to be comical here.
No, I know.
Because I think we're dealing with someone who is capable of this.
I need to laugh because otherwise I'll explode.
I mean, so if the president does something absolutely, undeniably insane, does the Secret Service come out and save him from himself? If he's standing there naked, do they come out and put a blanket around him? What happens when he throws off the blanket? He's there. Do we have to wait and see? Do we have to wait till he does this? Do we have to wait until he tries to slap Nancy Pelosi? There's one. That's not quite as ad absurdum. Mm-hmm. Let's say that they're sitting in the Oval Office again, like they've been known to do, and he reaches across and just slaps the shit out of Nancy Pelosi. What happens then? Well, 33% of the electorate of the United States will say, God damn it, she had it coming.
Right. Yep.
But are there any Republicans who will say anything other than, well, she provoked him? What if he takes a swing at Chuck Schumer? Because see, and I'm not just sitting here trying to generate fantastic, hyperbolic fact patterns. One of the things we know, because it was reported by the other kids that Dim Son went to school with at Penn, is that Pappy, slapped the ever-loving shit out of Don Jr. He came to school to pick him up, to take him to a Yankees game, and young Don Jr. was a college student, but apparently all kinds of excited, and he's standing there in his Yankees hat and his Yankees jersey. And Don shows up and says, have some class, and slaps the shit out of him and says, now get up and go put on a suit and tie.
Well, that coupled with, was it Brother Albert from Wisconsin?
Yes.
Who said many moons ago, I think, before he was even elected, before Trump was even elected, about the WWF stuff.
Yeah.
I think it was Brother Albert. So that, coupled with this heightened, maybe over, I don't know what the word I'm looking for here, but I don't personally think Trump is capable of body slamming anybody. I think that's put on, So when you take that into account, that he might be, he's a legend in his own mind in terms of his physical capabilities. I could see him potentially carrying that to an extreme, and I don't know, this kind of takes me to Michael Cohen, and I wanted to ask you about that, because Michael Cohen was saying, and I think Michael Cohen is telling the truth as he sees it, but he said that he could never see him hitting Melania, which flies in the face of previous reports that Ivana, Trump, his first wife, said that he raped her.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounded like he smacked her around a bit. So, and then, there was all this hush stuff, to hush her up, which is totally in keeping. So, I don't know. I'm questioning.
Oh,
that
I think
in
he's
terms
more
of-
than
I'm not-
I think he's more than willing to engage in violence with people he thinks cannot do him any harm in return.
Right.
Hitting his boy,
Which is
hitting his wife.
The cowardly.
Yeah.
Yeah, the cowardly. Yeah. And speaking of Michael Cohen, then, what did you think of his testimony that he did when they asked him, I can't remember which representative asked him if maybe it was Jackie Spear, whether or not Trump was doing was abusing drugs or medication or anything like that.
The minute I heard that question, I kind of regretted that it was asked because of the form of the question. Again, it's that it's that language stuff. Because she said illegal drugs, and the minute she used the word illegal, that gave him an out, because Adderall is quite legal.
So if she had phrased it as is he on medications?
Yeah. Have you ever seen him use a prescription medication in a way not not designed or not recommended by the prescribing information? Then his only out is to say, well, I don't know what the prescribing information would be. Or it's possible, in those 10 years, there's some shit you don't let your lawyer know. Because, again, a lawyer, as I'm sure you know, a lawyer's attorney-client, the attorney-client privilege attaches not to the lawyer but to the client. Okay? It is for the client to assert. But in the case of illegal activities, attorney-client privilege can be breached by the lawyer, because the rules of ethics generally say that you cannot claim privilege to protect your client's illegal activity.
Correct.
Let's use Michael Cohen and Donald Trump as an example. If Donald Trump says, Michael, I've got a pistol, and I'm going to go out and shoot someone in the middle of Fifth Avenue. And
brought that up.
And Michael has a reason to believe that, and a reason to think that harm is immediate. No, he'll do time if it comes out that he told him and he didn't take action. I mean, the attorney-client, as you well know, the attorney-client privilege is is pretty broad, and it's the most powerful privilege in the United States. Spousal privilege, priest penitent, doctor patient, those things pale in comparison with the attorney-client privilege, mainly because lawyers are the ones who write the rules. But even they recognize that, no, you cannot, or let's say, Michael, I've planted a bomb, and it's going to go off in 4 hours. Well, if that bomb goes off, he's fucked.
Right. Well, Cohen seems genuinely frightened of his own safety and the safety of his family.
Right.
Maybe, that so clearly, and he may simply because he wasn't really involved, say, directly in the administration. Maybe he didn't see. He simply didn't see anything happening. Who knows the stress and pressures of being in the Oval Office, although he doesn't do much. He has a lot of executive time. Maybe he didn't actually witness him receiving some kind of, medication to calm down or whatever.
Right. And he hasn't seen him much since he entered the White House. And so he has no real idea of what the Candyman and the other guy are doing just to keep him within the same general zip code as sane.
Right.
I mean, what do you think his handlers were thinking? What were they expecting when he went to? Because nobody was expecting that shit at CPAC. There was apparently no prepared address that was delivered to the media.
I think he's running home to mama, basically. I think because of whatever happened in Vietnam and with the Cohen pretty devastating public hearing, I think he needed to go back to what he thinks is his winning approach, which is to just talk off the cuff. My guess is that he probably told his handlers from the start, I'm going out there and winging it because that's what's always worked for me. And it was kind of a safe audience. It was CPAC. It's like when he goes to the staged, campaign, quote-unquote campaign rallies, even though he's not technically in the campaign anymore, that he needed to ground himself again, and that's how he grounds himself.
Wow. I only say that because if that's indeed the case, then he really is a wreck. Mike in Cascadia just sent me a great quote from a British writer. Best description of Trump I've read. Trump is neither plucky nor an underdog. He is the exact opposite of that. He's not even a spoiled rich boy or a greedy fat cat. He's more a fat white slug, a Jabba the Hutt of privilege. And worse, he is that most unforgivable of all things to the British, a bully. That is, except when he is among bullies, then he suddenly transforms into a sniveling sidekick instead.
That's perfect. Which would explain why he seems to kowtow to the likes of Vladimir Putin and Kim.
Well, I mean, over the weekend,
he still can't get his name right. Kim Jong-un.
Yeah. And over the weekend, was it Pompeo they trotted out? Who said, when he says that he believes Kim over what our intel...
that poor fella, yeah.
I know he graduated first in his class at West Point and everything, but, there's some things that first in your class can't even cover for. And he said, well, that's not what he said. Well, yeah, there's the tweet. He said that.
Yeah, and what the hell's his name there? the one with the bushy mustache, who is being interviewed, I think, by Jake Trapper. Is that his name? Jake?
Tapper, yeah.
Tapper, yeah. God, what is his name?
Well, I mean, there was Pompeo, and then there was Pornstache Bolton.
Yeah, Bolton, that's it. Yeah, covering for him. Bolton, I dismiss him, but, Mr. Pompeo, this, to me, I would think could potentially put the nail in the coffin for his career.
Oh, everybody who's, or at least you'd like to think, Darlene, that everybody he touches is going to turn to caca, that they're going to be unemployable by anybody but Fox News, and maybe that's enough, or a job with the Federalist Society or the Heritage Foundation or the Cato Institute, any of those wingnut welfare operations.
Right.
I mean, but then again, Nikki Nimrata Haley just got a job on the board of Boeing. So as long as he's in office, there's going to be people who want to curry favor with him.
Correct, and that takes me to my moron for Monday is Don McGahn. I don't know if you saw the Washington Post article about what he's up to.
Do tell.
And he apparently is rejoining his global law firm called Jones Day, and I guess that he apparently the article says it will keep him ensconced in conservative legal circles, and I guess that McConnell had indicated that they would continue to seek his support on judicial nominations. And the more that I read up on this guy, the more disturbed I get with him, and that he wants to remain involved with senior Senate Republicans as an outside advisor on nominations to the Supreme Court and federal courts. So, even though he's kind of been in the background all this time, he kind of revealed himself when he sat there behind Kavanaugh. And interestingly, unlike Cohn, who was the former economic advisor, who's currently writing his memoir, McGahn said that he's not going to engage in corporate speeches or write a book or anything like that.
No, and there's a reason for all of that. Remember, Don McGahn is a hard-scrabble Republican who came up through the ranks, didn't go to Harvard or Yale law schools, so he's got to work twice as hard, and he has to really double down in his lickspittlage in order to maintain whatever importance he thinks he has arrived at.
Right, and this article pegs him as being a key figure not only in the confirmation of Kavanaugh, but also of Gorsuch. And also, what's kind of disturbing is, let's see if.
Well, he must feel fairly confident, though, Darlene, if he thinks that that he's going to be able to do all of that, even though he was a cooperating witness with Mueller.
Right, right. And they mention that in this article. He's sort of a bit of a contradiction. But of course, we don't know exactly what he told Robert Mueller. But Walter Dellinger, who's the former acting Solicitor General for Bill Clinton, he's kind of almost pegging Don McGahn as being kind of, he almost sounds like the nexus in all of this, because he said they'd never, he said, he was quoted as saying, "We've never seen the equivalence of the Federalist Society in any administration prior, either Republican or Democratic. You have the White House, Federalist Society, and Senate leadership working together in an unprecedented way." So the implication being that Don McGahn is sort of the nexus in making that connection work. And I'm trying to see what he was doing. Oh, okay. So before he was, and he worked, and again, I cringe when I see this. And even with Robert Mueller, I question the whole thing about him interviewing with Trump. But McGahn was involved in the campaign, in Donald Trump's campaign.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of like,
and remember in
2000, White House counsel.
And remember in 2015, Donald Trump was not even welcome at CPAC.
Correct. Yes, he was not welcome at CPAC. And prior to working on the campaign and then becoming White House counsel, he was involved when he was working. He's going back to Jones Day. Apparently this is a global law firm. This sounds like a big deal. He did previous work on election law. He's going back to Jones Day, and this is like, oh God, he's going to lead the firm's government regulation practice as a partner in Washington.
Yeah, lobbying.
Oh, great. Yeah, and denuding and trying to dilute regulations. But I feel like, to me, isn't there an inherent conflict of interest? To be White House counsel, which is supposed to be for the office of the presidency itself, not necessarily for a single president.
I thought there was a revolving door law now. Maybe it only applies to people who were elected. But there's supposed to be a year between your exit from office and doing anything about any regulation or any legislation.
Right. So how are they getting away with this? Like, how did Don McGahn become White House counsel? I kind of don't.
Well, he wasn't. See, that's the thing.
And the same thing with Emmett.
Walsh.
Sure, Emmett.
Walsh.
No. He stepped in. Emmett Flood.
Yeah.
Flood. He stepped in as, I guess, the interim White House counsel when they were looking for Pat Cipollone to replace Don McGahn. How could Emmett Flood be White House counsel when he's representing? Because
none of these people were subject to a confirmation process. There's no effective. Do you remember? Yeah, you remember when everybody was having a baby over Steve Bannon being advisor to the president, and people were signing petitions left and right, and Democratic members of the House and Senate were screaming bloody murder. Well, there wasn't a damn thing anybody could do about it because he was not subject to a confirmation process.
So they can openly do these open conflicts of interest. In my opinion, would you agree that there's some conflicts of interest,
sure,
but they're not being called?
Sure.
Why aren't they being? Why isn't Jerry Nadler pointing it out, or somebody saying something?
I would guess in this particular, Darlene, in this particular instance, nothing's being said because they are, as the saying goes, up to their ass in alligators and struggling to make luggage.
Right.
I mean, it's at this point in time, it's a form of political triage. You got to deal with the sucking chest wounds before you get to the sprained ankles.
Yeah, almost picking or choosing your battles because. And even with Robert Mueller, I don't quite understand why Robert Mueller would have interviewed for the FBI position, the FBI director. And I have to find the law because he already did that stint. 10 years max, and you're done. And they extended his term 2 years at the request of President Obama, because they were still trying to, I think they were still trying to transition the FBI into counterterrorism, and also they were working on Sentinel, which was the new computer system to get the FBI up to speed in terms of cybersecurity. I don't see how Robert Mueller was even eligible to interview as FBI director.
Well, he had a Republican Congress, so maybe they thought that they could go back to the Congress and ask him for another waiver,
another extension, another waiver.
Which
another imaginary scenario in Trump's head. I'm wondering, did that? But obviously didn't happen. And he became special counsel the next day. But I've been questioning that. But I read that yeah he did interview. But I read a report when it said they didn't indicate what he interviewed for.
Hell, he may have interviewed. It may have been just a matter of, hey, would you like to be Attorney General?
Right. I'm questioning that, and I can't see Mueller being stupid enough to want to put his hat in the ring with somebody like.
Well, obviously it didn't happen, but by the same token, remember, and I know this sounds bad, but he's still a Republican. And there are people who are persisting, Darlene, in the fantasy that the Republican Party is somehow going to be returning to, the party of Reagan, which by my lights is no bonus. But they think that, they're just going to be rock-ribbed, American values, salute the flag, and that after Donald Trump is gone, and that we'll just preserve some of the norms so that the Republican Party won't turn entirely into a group of nativist, knuckle-walking, mouth-breathing troglodytes. The problem is, it's been that all along, and it is their failure to recognize it.
Can I push back a little bit on that?
Yeah, you can push all you want.
Okay, because a person, if you put somebody in an unscripted situation, they always reveal themselves. Even Robert Mueller, because if you listen to Q&A sessions after he's given like a lecture, because he's done lectures, like he likes to go to schools. After he had to step down as FBI director, which he didn't want to do. He loved being FBI director, but he had to step down because the 10 years was out, and the 2 years after that was grudgingly approved by Chuck Grassley, and he didn't want it to go, but he approved the additional 2 years. He was mentoring students, I guess, at Stanford and then at Georgetown. And it's funny because in the question and answer sessions, he can kind of talk himself into a whole discussion that he didn't need to talk himself into. But he was talking about the time that when he first came on board as FBI director. And my guess is it was his first. He came on as FBI director September 4th, not September 1st. And my understanding is he had to have prostate. He had prostate cancer. He had to have surgery. So he started 4 days late as FBI director. And then I assume it was the first full year. George Tenet was the CIA director. And George Tenet approached him and said, I guess they had some discussions, and he said, by the way, Bob, you are going to the State of the Union address in a couple of weeks. So this was early January. And Mueller was like, what do you mean? That's so political. Why am I? He goes, well, it's tradition. The CIA director goes 1 year, and the FBI director goes the next year. He goes, I went last year. It's your turn this year. So Mueller went. He went to, and this is somebody who claims he is aggressively apolitical. And it's funny listening to him describe that whole story because it's like he's right back in it. He is absolutely freaked out about having to be in a political situation like that. And he's talking about how he described it was interesting. He said, I had to sit on the Republican side. He goes, I'm sitting on the Republican side because it was George W. Bush, a Republican administration, and that's what I'm working for. Who I'm working with or working for is a Republican administration. He said, and the first thing that George W. Bush brings up is partial birth abortions. He said, and he thought, and it's funny listening to him because he's talking. It's like he's right back in the situation. He's like, and he goes, I'm not going to stand up for that and clap because that's totally political, and it has nothing to do with the FBI. So he does it. He sits while everybody on the Republican side gets up and claps, and nobody on the Democratic side is. They're all sitting down and not clapping. And he said, and he goes, they're all staring at me and looking. Why aren't you standing up and clapping? Why aren't you doing? And so he was really wigged out. And he said, the next thing that Bush brings up, I'm going to stand up no matter what it is. So whatever he I don't even think he remembers what it was, but he stood up and started clapping. And then he says, and this is what was really interesting. He says, and then he goes, my friends on the other side, Patrick Leahy, and he goes, they're all staring at me as like, why are you standing up? You're supposed to be apolitical. You're not supposed to be standing up. So he said, he was so wigged out, he said, I'm never going, he told George Tenet, I'm never doing this again. Never doing this again. And so what I thought was interesting was how he described the Republicans as like he had to sit with them, but when he talked about the Democrats, he said, my friends on the other side. And from other things that I've seen and heard, he seems to like them a hell of a lot better. And they've treated him very well. Like there's been indications Patrick Leahy raves about Robert Mueller's wife. They've met his family, all of that stuff. So I'm wondering because Robert Mueller has a weird side. He clearly has a weird side.
Not as weird as Comey, but...
Not as, you got that straight. Comey is way off, and I think Robert Mueller knew that Comey was going to blow it. But that's a whole other thing. But to me, he may, who knows? He was a young guy. Maybe he wound up, registering as a Republican and just kept it that way and never did anything. But I clearly believe he likes the Democrats a lot better, and they treat him a lot better. They've always treated him a lot better.
Let me ask you this: we've transitioned away from our primary topic, but that's cool.
Yeah.
What do you make? Because I'll admit I got the creeps during Barr's confirmation hearings when he talked about what dear friends he is with the Mueller family and how Mrs. Barr and Mrs. Mueller go to church every Sunday together, and then within a couple of weeks' time of him being confirmed, son of a gun, Barr's kid is advising the White House. Now you want to talk about a conflict of interest? Jesus Christ! Yep,
exactly. Yeah, again, that's Barr speaking. Mueller isn't. Who knows who knows? Maybe they are best buds, or maybe they're just trying to keep the peace because the wives get along. I don't know. But yeah, that I think Barr creeps me out. Oh, look at this guy. I'm like, he creeps me out. And I don't know if he's younger than Robert Mueller. He might be. He looks younger. I don't know, but I don't know what to make of that. Again, it's one-sided. Mueller might have a very different attitude about it. I don't know, because my understanding is that he has a very limited circle of friends, and I don't know what to make of that. It could be something to keep the wives happy. I read that they attend Bible study together, which is like, ew. That's like gross. But maybe Mrs. Mueller is very religious. I don't know. And they do the Bible. I don't know. That's just, I'm not sure what to make of that. I don't know what to make of that. But it would seem to me to potentially put these two men in a conflictory position if it is Barr's intention to try to protect the president, because I truly don't see Mueller doing that. I don't think Robert Mueller can help himself. I think that if he sees a crime, he wants to see that person in jail. And he probably hates the fact that he's bootstrapped by this ridiculous DOJ protocol that you can't indict a sitting president. So
that's the I think
he'll
that
follow
has
it.
to
He'll follow it.
That has to be challenged. But I mean, I don't know how far he will follow it because A, it's only a guidance. It doesn't even have the force of regulation. It applies only within the Department of Justice. But the other guidance that I'm worried about them following is something that I've seen referred to several occasions in several different articles relative to whatever his report is, that the department must be mindful of the rights of the unaccused.
That pisses me off because I feel like, it's like, who the fuck is this William Barr? It's almost like he swoops in out of nowhere and is suddenly going to potentially control what we may or may not see. And I feel, and he wrote that weird article about the special counsel, I guess, where he was railing against it. So much for, Bob Mueller being a good friend of his. I'm wondering what is this friendship really about? But to me, it seems like he did that to get attention, and he got it. He got attention because then Trump, by his own testimony, by Barr's own testimony, his confirmation hearing, Trump interviewed him, and then he gave him his phone number, and he never called him. And I think the only reason, and maybe it is because they're good friends, but then Trump said he didn't know that they were supposedly good friends. But and again, I question, well, what does good friends mean? Who knows what that means in terms of what Barr thinks and what Robert Mueller thinks. But it seems interesting to me that Trump only contacted him because no one else wanted to be AG. He wasn't. It was almost like it was a fallback. That's
right, and like I said during the harangue on Saturday, we got him doing his, and I'm so much better at it than he is, his cheesy ass cornpone accent. Well, I've got to recuse myself.
Oh yes, Sessions. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. And all these
nobody calls him out on that though, Bob. No, nobody calls him out on the fact that at the time he appointed Sessions didn't know he was going to recuse himself, right?
Well, no, he didn't.
There's a timing issue here.
Well, but I'm a little bit less sanguine than you on that because Sessions claimed that he had plumb forgot about that there meeting he had at the Republican National Convention, with the Russian ambassador. I meet with so many ambassadors as a member of the Foreign Relations Committee of the Senate. I just can't keep up with all the Russian ambassadors I meet. And I think there had to be something in the back of his mind. But he was tickled pink because, he'd been there in the Senate for a while, but he was pretty much a backbencher. He didn't make a lot of noise. He didn't introduce bills. He drew his breath and his pay. But he jumped on the Trump train early, and it got him some love.
Because he was eyeing the AG. He wanted to be AG.
Well, yeah.
I think he wanted to be AG for years.
Well,
yeah.
But precisely because of what happened to him when he was nominated to be a federal judge. He was rejected because everybody all of a sudden found out about him walking around saying, I used to think the Klan was pretty cool till I found out to smoke the marijuanas. And telling a fellow lawyer in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Birmingham, boy, you got to be careful what you say around the white ladies here, you understand? And he did that shit. And it torpedoed his Reagan nominated him to be the U.S. District Judge, I think, for the Southern District of Alabama. And it got tanked. And
so you're thinking that the Sessions actually... Sessions, I still don't necessarily think that Sessions would have known he would have recused himself, but that Sessions lied and just didn't think. The only reason he did that was because he got caught.
Right, and because
lying.
he saw that Attorney General nomination as some sort of not expiation but validation of his right to be there 30 years ago when he was stopped by the Senate.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, he criticized Mueller because when Mueller was FBI director, in terms of the caseload or the where Mueller was putting resources, because he would bring up charts and say, look, you're not prosecuting enough bad guys, it's dropped, and Mueller would say, well, look, we're doing counterterrorism now, and we have limited resources, so we have to kind of put more towards this category as opposed to that. And I think I think he's wanted to be AG for many years. And of course, when he became AG, look what he was doing. I mean, he was going after immigrants, and of course, who was it that said he's very racist? I don't know if it was.
Well, no, it was Elizabeth Warren got shut down for trying to read Coretta Scott King's letter that said he is a stone cold racist.
Right, which you have been saying for quite some time, and it was revealed recently that it was McCabe, Andrew McCabe, who brought it up. How much of a racist Jefferson
FBI
Davis
used to be a better organization when we only hired Irish. They're prone to drinking. They're prone to drinking some, but it's better than what we had now. And he's sitting there talking to a guy whose name is McCabe. If Andrew McCabe had looked at him and said, well, top of the morning to you, would you like a drink?
Yep. Oh, yeah.
And I still say that he's the easiest get of any indictment out there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Franken impeached him straight up. Lying to Congress is still a felony, isn't it?
Yeah, I would say so. But they typically don't go after them. They typically don't go after one of their own, so to speak. The Congress.
No, and that's why he expected an easy confirmation, collegiality and all.
Yeah, exactly. Real quick, as a quick side note, did you happen to see that article about? Oh gosh, I thought I had it here because I was looking at it. The raid. Oh gosh, it was done on this guy that had. Let me see if I can find it. It was very, very. It was very. That 91-year-old missionary who was collecting Native American.
Yes, I did, and had a basement full of bones.
Yeah, and the FBI said that he had 2,000 bones, because talking about racism, and bigotry, he had 2,000 bones, and the FBI estimates that there was 500 human beings.
Yeah, in his collection.
Which I guess he started. He found an arrowhead as a kid on his family's farm or something, and that just. And he traveled. Obviously, he had means, and he traveled all over the world. And
as someone who loves with an abiding love the discipline and the practice of archaeology, and who understands the damage that people like him do to sites that can never be. You can't fix it. It was infuriating. And I saw one remark by, I think, a Native American who said, and all those bones weren't none of those white folks. Because you don't collect white folks' bones. You revere their bodies as they lay in the ground. But the rest of us, we're curiosities. But here's the thing. I'm so glad you brought this up because it fits so nicely with Moran Monday. There, I saw one photograph from his home Did you happen to see this?
The basement?
Well, the sort of personal museum that he'd set up.
Yeah.
Displays and all that.
With the bear rug.
Yeah, and there's a rug,
yeah.
and there's like
Amazing.
stone tools set up, but right smack dab in the middle of the picture, and I mean it just jumped out at me, Darlene.
Okay.
Bunch of Confederate generals and a Confederate flag.
Ooh, I'm trying to see that, and I can't.
I think the story I saw came from CBS.
Yeah, CBS this morning. I'm looking at. I don't want to start the video up because we're talking, but I'm trying to. His name was Miller. He died, Donald C. Miller. So his wife is left with the mess.
And she's trying to do the right thing.
Yeah, and this is a rural farming community, Waldron, Indiana, and it basically is a museum. It sounded like, he would have people come in and take a look at
and
what
the
he has.
pots, the clay pots. Oh my God!
Yeah, I'm seeing the clay pots, the stones, arrowheads. There's all kinds of things here that he has.
Yeah,
and
no respect whatsoever for
No. Tens of thousands rare cultural artifacts. So he violated I think it's the law of antiquities. He's in violation of it. 2,000 human bones, which they estimate make up 500 human beings. And he was a Christian missionary.
Well, of course he was.
And ham radio operator who claimed to have worked on the Manhattan Project. And so the FBI's they've got a mess on their hands because they've got to try to return everything. There's 42,000 items. His cultural value is probably multi-millions of dollars worth in this collection. And the ghoulish crime of digging up long dormant graves has been an ongoing source of frustration for Native American communities. And it sounds like he went into other countries as well.
Oh yeah. Well, no, he had a Chinese terracotta figurine.
Yeah. Yes.
But there was one photo, and I'm looking at the video
soldiers.
myself right now. And there was one photo that showed, and you could see it hanging there on the wall, and there was a Confederate flag and some Confederate generals.
Yeah, he had a World War II era Nazi helmet and a shrunken head whose provenance he did not fully explain. He was with Naval Avionics to conduct amateur archaeological expeditions. How the hell did he get away with this for so long? It's like when you look at somebody like Manafort, how the hell did he get away with this shit for so long? Yeah, he had a Chinese terracotta warrior statue. How the hell did he get his hands on one of those things?
How do you get it to the United States?
Good point. How do you get it through customs?
That's one, and this is just a tangent, but during the Second World War, the atrocities and after the Second World War, we documented very well the atrocities committed by the Japanese. But what nobody ever talks about is that the military authorities in the Pacific Command had to get downright hateful. Well, not hateful, but really, really, because American soldiers coming back from the theater were bringing back Japanese body parts as souvenirs.
Mm.
We hear about the Vietnam era and people, with ears strung on it, right? Well, that shit started in the South Pacific with American forces, pulling teeth skulls, jawbones, flesh, and there was a vast accumulation of it in Hawaii.
Well, he sure as all shit didn't get out of Haiti with anything, because interestingly, he tried to leave Haiti with a few cannonballs, it said here in the article. He ended up getting stopped at the airport. And this was when he was on a mission trip to Haiti, which I have to wonder, was that cover for his archaeological exploits?
Well, I mean, there are places here in the United States, and I imagine the one place that I'm thinking about right now that just blew my mind when I was a young man back in 1983 has probably since been plundered. But they're not protected. Most of them are on so-called private property, and people can do with them as they please. We had a story a year or so ago. An amateur was just digging around in a rock shelter down by the Kanawha River and found a skull and thought it was a woman who'd been missing for about 20 years. Mm-hmm. Well, they sent it off to the FBI forensic lab, and no, it was a human being from 10,000 years ago.
Oh, wow.
And, people just go and start digging around. What the hell?
Right. Well, in Connecticut, they passed a new law where there's the Indian burial mounds, and they're like yes, Connecticut does have forests. We're not just all in, all built up, but up where I am, the state archaeologist says has said you cannot touch anything out here that looks like that's and they're kind of distinctive. It's like this unusual mound, very, very high mound, and they find them in the forests, and those, they have to be left alone.
I just read a story yesterday from down in Central America using the fairly new technology of LIDAR. A Mayan city that was heretofore unknown has been discovered that had as many buildings in it as Manhattan does.
Ooh.
And a population possibly approaching 100,000 human beings.
Oh, that's amazing.
And it all just looks like jungle now. And
right.
And we're finding out more and more. And eventually, maybe that technology will be further deployed, and we're going to find out things about the pre-Columbian Americas that are going to shatter everything we thought we knew. Another city was discovered. No, it was this city, and it wasn't Mayan. It was the Purepecha in Michoacan, and in fact, our buddy James over in Spain turned me on to the story. And one of the things that I remarked on is that had that culture not had contact with white European invaders, they were about to make a huge technological leap, because the Purepecha had discovered the recipe for bronze. So they had literally left the Stone Age and come into the Bronze Age. The Bronze Age is followed by the Iron Age, and we probably need to remember that, that's most of what we consider to be European civilization is Iron Age. The hill forts of England, the horse that's carved out of the chalk hillside, that's all Iron Age Britain.
That's fascinating.
Oh, it absolutely blows my mind. Darlene, this has been a lovely conversation. I'm so glad you chimed
yes,
in.
Yeah.
I will save many of my morans for tomorrow for Titanic Tuesday.
Okay. Just to wrap up on that article about Miller here, the guy the FBI is saying he violated multiple laws and treaties, and but also undercut that claim by acknowledging that the relevant statutes may not have been in place yet. And he had started, so they're kind of in a real mess here. But here, and this takes it back to the Constitution, interestingly enough, because advocates for criminal justice reform, criminal justice reform, in quotes, and libertarian groups such as the Cato Institute,
Ding.
which I said, the Cato Institute, which is on the back of my, I got to get another a little Constitution booklet, were quick to criticize what they considered an overly aggressive approach from the FBI, arguing that the government had offered no evidence that Miller had done anything illegal. They're terrible.
Except like grave robbing.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
grave robbing's been illegal since, merry old England, right?
Oh, no. According to the Cato Institute, Bob, the FBI is seizing the contents of an elderly man's lifelong hobby.
Right, because it's not grave robbing if they're not white. Is that it?
Exactly. Wonderful conversation, as always, Bob.
Delightful, Darlene. Have yourself a wonderful evening.
You too.
All right, take care. Bye now. The one and only Darlene from Connecticut. I'd say that conversation all by itself was worth the price of admission. And by the way, we got $150 to raise this evening, and so far we are at what? Yes, 0. So if we could at least take it down by $50, so we're only dealing with only $300 tomorrow, that would be wonderful. If we could take down the whole 150 and actually be even, that's even awesomer still. And thanks again to Catherine for knocking out the first $50 of the 200 this evening. Thank you very kindly. Let's go over and see what's going on with Scott. Hey, Scott.
Oh, Bob, help me up.
What?
You and Darlene have left me weak from the conversation. It was so good, I couldn't hardly stand it no more.
Well,
so thank you.
Well, you're
me.
You're more than welcome. I mean, I love the stuff I learn on this program, and I love searches for answers, because we're living in an answerless time, Scott.
You two have rung more than a few bells topically that I want to expand upon. But before I do anything else, I needs must wish you March 4th, 2019, a happy National Pound Cake Day.
I saw that.
Yes, it's and in honor of that, I have posted, I hope with your...
Well, there goes Skype doing what Skype does.
What?
You have posted, you hope with my blessing,
Aunt Effie's pound cake recipe, my great-great-aunt
goody.
Effie's. And with your kind permission, I put it on your Bob Kincaid Facebook timeline so that everybody can enjoy it. And I hope that they will go out, buy the ingredients, fire up the oven, and make one of her pound cakes. Does
it call for creaming the butter into the sugar?
Yes.
Okay, I hope people know what that means.
Well,
You've got to leave the butter sit out until it becomes room temperature.
Yes.
And melted, you can't melt it. It's got to still have its solid integrity, but you gotta work that butter with a wooden spoon and the sugar until they are completely incorporated together.
Yes, on a molecular basis.
Yeah, damn near.
But Aunt Effie's pound cake is so rich and dense, you could call it Trump cake. But try it anyway because it's wonderful. It'll take you home. So, all right, you and Darlene touched upon so many things, and I'm going to go down the list very quickly. For those wishing the straight poop about Don McGahn, the 2018 documentary Dark Money goes into his sordid past, and it's on Amazon Prime Video. Chirps, what's the deal? She's crying about something. What's the matter? What's the matter? I'll feed you after I'm through talking to Bob.
Yes, if you go for the wet food, we call that catay around here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, no, it's very odd.
And I know you got a list. So Dark Money, Netflix. I got to throw this in though because there's been a lot of talk about it.
Come on.
For some reason, well, I mean, just because when you and Tracy are both losing your shit over the same piece of film, I'm duty bound to view it.
Mm-hmm.
So last night, Agnes and I watched Abducted in Plain Sight.
Oh no. Oh no.
And I have to tell you, and I'm not there's Agnes won't get mad at me for saying this. I, in 26 years, nearly 26 years of marriage, more than 26 years of knowing her, have never heard my wife use the phrase, "what the fuck," more in a short period of time than I did while that video was running last night. And Carol Baker later described it and said, yeah, I had 2 hours of what the fuck Tourette's. The damnedest thing I've ever seen. And those have to have been some of the simplest, dumbest, brainwashed people I've ever heard tell of.
Well, the word that came to mind for me regarding the girl's parents were irretrievably gullible.
Yeah, that Bugs Bunny. What a gullible.
And the thing is, the young girl in the film, she was a child, so you can excuse her for not questioning or whatever. But the parents, there was no excuse.
But and I don't want to take anything away from, I don't want to spoil it for anybody, because everybody deserves the opportunity to watch this and just mutter what the fuck for an hour and a half. That whole scenario, and this isn't, religious bigotry or anything like that, it's just an observable fact, is only, I think that story can only happen in a Mormon community. I mean,
well,
sure, similarly ugly things have happened in other communities, but that particular fact pattern, and it's kind of a Moran nomination, can only happen in a Mormon community, because that's a religion that believes that God lives on his own planet somewhere in outer space, and the planet is called Kolob.
well, it
And so certain elements of it were predisposed to be believable.
I may have to watch it again if I can stand it, because it was a hell of a film. I mean, I was gobsmacked. So, yeah, definitely watch that, Abducted in Plain Sight. But since you all did raise the topic of Don McGahn, if you have Amazon Prime, it's free for subscribers and a couple of bucks otherwise. Dark Money documentary on Amazon Prime. It's I haven't seen it for a while, but it does delve into his sordid past. You were talking about FDR. That he had just turned 63, Bob, in January of 1945, and he died a couple of months later. A year younger than me, which caught my attention right away. He was a chain smoker in his entire adult life, unfiltered Camels, and had been in declining health since at least 1940.
Really, Camels? I kind of had him down for a Dunhill man.
No, he was Camel Man. Shortly after his 62nd birthday in the spring of 44, now this will sound familiar in today's world, he underwent testing at Bethesda Hospital and was found to have, are you ready? High blood pressure, atherosclerosis, coronary artery disease causing angina pectoris, and congestive heart failure. But it gets worse. In 44, during the re-election campaign, his personal physician, Admiral Ross McIntyre, denied that Roosevelt's health was poor. On October 12th, for example, he announced that the president's health is perfectly okay. Now, where have you heard that before?
Is that kind of like Donald Trump's going to live to be 200?
Maybe. But anybody will do well to watch the Ken Burns documentary series, the Roosevelts, because he covers a lot of Roosevelt's health issues in the film. But Jesus, and you were talking about JFK. You kind of conjured me up, referring back to my.
Well, you've discussed it on a number of occasions. Maybe this is Skype doing Skype again. Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was Skype doing Skype again. Yeah, I guess I did kind of conjure it because the point of my observation was that, you're a guy in his 60s now, and you were a kid when it happened. You remember it vividly.
Yeah.
But there just aren't a shit ton of real, live, honest-to-goodness adults who can remember what a nightmare mess it was when it happened. I mean, one of the people who who probably has talked about it just passed away a few weeks ago, and that was John Dingell.
Yeah. Well, the people of that era are not getting any younger. I mean, the adults, when I was a kid, they were still adults. People like Dingell, and the other senators.
Lloyd Benson. We remarked on this the other night. I knew John Kennedy. John Kennedy was a friend of mine. You're no John Kennedy.
Yeah. But
for anybody, and the larger point there, Scott, is for anybody who thinks that, the president died in office, ho hum. Look, there's the vice president. He's the president now. Okay, just continue on. That don't happen.
Well, and that's when you were talking about the importance of choosing wisely in terms of a vice president. You do it for electoral reasons, but you've also got to have in mind the fact that whoever you've picked to be your vice president has to be able to step in and do a similar job as you would have had you not had your fucking brains spattered on the pavements of Dallas. In the case of JFK, anybody who wants to get who wasn't around then or was too young to remember the event and the aftermath through the 60s, please do yourself a favor. Go to Amazon Books and order a copy of JFK and the Unspeakable, Why He Died and Why It Matters. It was published in 2008, written by a man named James W. Douglas with two S's at the end. I'm telling you, it is in the top 3 books on the topic of JFK that I have ever read. And this is stuff that is not taught in history classes. This is stuff that is not.
And by the same token, it's not stuff that you can find in magazines that have advertisements for sea monkeys in the back either.
No. But JFK and the Unspeakable, you can get a used copy for about $7 on Amazon. I recommend it highly. If you read no other book about JFK and what he was up against and what he wanted, the way he was when he went into office and the way he was in the final 18 months of his life, a transformation was occurring, which had he been able to be reelected in 64, the world that we are in today would have been so different that you would not recognize it. So please read that book. Read and you kind of touched upon when you were talking about the 25th Amendment. You mentioned 3 films of the era: Dr. Strangelove, On the Beach, and Failsafe. But there's a 4th film that you didn't mention that is relevant to the 25th Amendment, and that is 7 Days in May.
Well, yeah, that's true. That's true. I did neglect that, and that is, of course, that was released just within a year of the Kennedy assassination.
Yeah, Strangelove, Failsafe, and 7 Days in May were released in '64, and On the Beach was released in
1959.
yeah, and all of them are worth a look if you haven't seen them or haven't seen them for a while, because we live in perilous times. The lunatics, if you will, are trying to take over the asylum, and in some cases they have. And I mean, if you just look, if you can bear to do it, at the 2.5-hour harangue, and that's the best word I've heard to describe it, of Trump at CPAC on Saturday, he's the chief lunatic in charge. And I don't mean to cast aspersions against people with, psychological issues. This guy is off the fucking twig. And the folks in the crowd hooting and clapping and stomping are off a similar twig. And they are how we ended up with this asshat. So it's enough to make you want to bake a cake and take your mind off your troubles here.
Well, yes, and as a matter of fact, I had a note from Lee a minute ago who said, one time my wife took our toddler to the supermarket. My wife gave her a pound cake. It kept her busy. By the time they got to the register, my toddler turned it into pound cake. I ate it with a spoon.
Yes, you must treat it gently. But I'll tell you one thing about Aunt Effie's pound cake. It's resilient, and what you will result the end result of successfully engaging in the recipe, you will get a not heavy, but a dense cake. This is not a store-bought, pumped up with air, artificial ingredients pound cake. This is the real deal. And I think the recipe probably goes back to when she was a child, and she was born in like 1866 or 1867. So trust me on three things, if nothing else. Aunt Evie's pound cake, make one tonight and amaze and delight your friends and relatives. Don McGann, Dark Money, Amazon Prime, and James Douglas's 2008 book, JFK and the Unspeakable. I have never steered you wrong, folks.
Nope, you haven't.
And I ain't going to start now. And then, if you have any strength left, watch Abducted in Plain Sight as you enjoy the pound cake. It's especially good with a scoop of ice cream on the side.
Oh, I can imagine with some strawberries when the strawberries are fresh.
Oh, yes.
Ripe.
Oh.
Especially if you can get them that, have ripened naturally nearby.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The other thing, and I'm looking at the recipe right now, I'm surprised it has nutmeg in it and not vanilla.
I think there is vanilla in it. I may be wrong, but I thought that there was vanilla.
I see nutmeg, flour, eggs, sugar, butter.
Well, if you're so inclined, slap a little splash of vanilla.
And here's the other, if you're so inclined.
Yeah.
Make a rum sugar syrup.
Ooh. Like a drizzle?
No, not well. I mean, what you're going to do is you're going to. It's basically sugar and rum and butter. And you're going to pour it over, and it's going to soak in. And if you serve it at your ladies' sewing circle meeting come Sunday, the sewing circle will have more fun than it has ever had at any previous meeting. Because the alcohol she don't boil off.
Stitches will be dropped, ladies.
Yes. The next thing you know, they'll be crocheting the flying spaghetti monster.
Yeah, it'll make a lovely sampler. But no, try it on its own as it is first, with some of that buttered rum sugar coating on the side for later. I mean, the experience.
No, it's exquisite by itself. Yeah.
Oh yeah, there's the ice cream.
Now the other thing you can do, in place of vanilla. There's this, and there's a very similar recipe on the label. There's an imitation butter and nut flavoring that's probably still available.
Mm-hmm.
It is red in the bottle, but when you pour it into your measuring spoon, it's golden. It's weird. And it doesn't impart any color at all. But
is that in the extracts aisle?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's something butter and nut. And well, next time if you're at Ralph's or whatever, if you see it, look at because they put their butter cake recipe on it, and it's very nearly the same as what you're describing. And the flavor, oh, the flavor, dear God, the flavor.
Well, what is the nut? Is it like hazelnut or pecan or?
It's artificial as hell. It's probably made of petroleum byproducts, but God, it's good.
Can you put it in your lawnmower or your weed eater?
I think when we were cleaning out my parents' house, my mother had a bottle that was 40 years old.
Wow.
Because it just lasts that long. Doesn't take much.
Now I'm hungry. Now I want to bake.
Oh no, yeah.
Odd heavy
the little Rippy Mart up the road has some of that Starbucks style lemon glazed pound cake by the slice, and I'm thinking, but I ought not.
Yeah, I'd hold out for the real thing. If and I know your oven is not. There's a deal going on with your oven. Maybe one of us will bake 2 of them and ship the extra one to the.
It's conceivable that we've got a small portable, I guess you would call it. It's like a toaster oven, but it's an actual real convection oven. You can set temperatures on it and everything. Might be able to pull it off with that. Either a bundt cake or a loaf pan.
I don't know if you can do this recipe on a grill. Okay, I know you might try, but I'm not sure that it's got a.
I'll bet you I could with the right pan.
Well, yeah, because you've got to contain the heat somehow, and but see, then you don't want to have smoky flavor.
Oh, you forget I've done cornbread out there, and it doesn't come out smoky.
Okay, well, what the hell, Bob? You're only young once.
Because you're just going for you're just getting the coals down. You're not throwing hickory or grape or anything in there to add the smoke flavor.
Yeah.
Now you've thrown a damn gauntlet down. You understand that?
Will the weather cooperate? Can you get out and do it?
No, it's too soon. But
yeah,
I think what I think would be lovely. On the same day, do the pound cake over on the Acorn, and do the chicken fall curry over, courtesy of Suman. Do that over on the propane stove.
There you go. It sounds like a plan to me.
Oh, and by the way, I tasted that chili salt that Tom sent along.
Uh-huh.
Send a card to Mother. Oh my God, is it good? I mean, it's dry. It's like salt, but it's got a chili. It's yellow. It's golden yellow, from like some sort of habanero that didn't get red or orange, and just to take it and sprinkle it on. Oh yes. On a burger, on a steak, on a pork chop, on a chicken breast. Yes. And occasionally, when you walk by the refrigerator, you just you unscrew the lid and you just take a little pinch and you put it on your tongue and you keep moving. Yeah. If you've got a problem like I do.
Yeah. Well, you are addicted to hot sauce. I know that.
I like to think it's good for my blood pressure.
Well, I'm sure
it's a good vasodilator.
And the endorphins. I mean, you can't go too terribly wrong doing nice things with the endorphins.
Did you hear that little snap?
No. Yeah, I think I did. I thought it was my knee.
That's the studio hot sauce.
There you go.
Just perks me up now and then.
That's living, Bob.
Well, when the studio's only 59 degrees, you got to heat up somehow or another.
God, see, now this is what Mother Nature did to you. Wasn't it just a week ago where you were doing
Naked radio.
It was
Yes.
lovely weather and stuff.
Fucking climate change.
God, and the part of Alabama that got so terribly hit yesterday by the massive tornado, is that anywhere near where your people are from?
If you draw a diagonal line from the northwest corner of Alabama to the southeast corner, it's about as far away as you can get in Alabama from where I'm from.
Yeah,
but I know the area well because Auburn University is in Lee County,
yeah.
And most of the damage was done in Lee and Geneva counties.
And you see that stuff, and you feel bad just on a human level for people, no matter what their mindset is. And it's heartbreaking. I mean,
it is. I mean, I've lived through them. None like that, but I've lived through them. And
here in California, we have the fires, and there used to be fire season, but now it doesn't know the calendar. It doesn't.
Now it's just always fire season.
Yeah, or occasional earthquakes, or mudslides, or torrential rain. I mean, it's crazy.
Well, it's like the difference between a tornado and a hurricane. A hurricane is hell's a poppin' if it's 120 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And that's as my brother-in-law has put it, it'll make you crazy because it's 120 mile an hour wind howling at you for 12 hours.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like just being beaten on for 12 hours. On the other hand, a tornado, like quite possibly what ripped through Beauregard, Alabama yesterday, that was north of 250 mile an hour winds, for less than a minute.
Yeah, but in that minute, it's like hit and split.
Right. Well, it's like a bomb going off. The only thing that isn't there where Beauregard used to be is a great big crater where the bomb hit. Everything else looks like a bomb.
Yeah.
But I was gonna. Wait, where were we? I was gonna add something in here at the very end. I've said that I'm not going to jump out and get on anybody's bandwagon presidential campaign wise, and maybe I'll get hate mail for this. But I was actually encouraged by Washington Governor Jay Inslee getting into the mix.
Yeah, I saw that that he had jumped in, and who else jumped in? Another
Hickenlooper, Colorado. Yeah. Jay Inslee issued his campaign is climate change.
Yeah.
And the thing that sort of impresses me about him is, and you know what, by tomorrow morning I will have a stack of purity emails telling me what a goddamn DNC establishment shill he is and blah, 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 blah. But somebody who will put climate change at the top of the list and appears to have a track record of taking it seriously,
yeah,
is going to get my consideration. Now, let's bear in mind, I don't vote until May of 2020, so that the fight will be well decided by then.
Yeah,
but I've got to at least give a look to anybody who's talking climate change and has experience as a chief executive of anything, whether it's a state or a county or a city, what have you. And unless I'm mistaken, Inslee's also got congressional experience. So he might be well worth taking a look at.
Yeah, it's going to get crowded on the debate stages.
Well, who knows? A bunch of them may wither on the vine before we get anywhere. But I'm not going to get out and hate on any candidates. I watched what happened. I watched the reports from Selma yesterday, and let 1,000 flowers bloom. Although I was a little at a loss for, I'll get in trouble saying that. Never mind. But I'm going to pay attention to the guy because, among other things, and we've run over time, but I'm going to take just long enough to share this because it's worth it for a Moran Monday. It was a beautiful thing. He took that idiot Meghan McCain to school today because she tried to parrot some of the bullshit, nobody's going to let us have a hamburger or fly on an airplane crap. She claims to be sort of never Trumpy, but there she was repeating the same goddamn stupid shit he was babbling about Saturday at CPAC. Just check this out. It's a couple of minutes, okay? This is Jay Inslee. This is Jay Inslee on The View, governor of Washington, presidential candidate.
Maybe I am just a unicorn from another planet. Climate change doesn't...
Nah, she's an idiot. This is Meghan McCain. She's a unicorn from another planet. She's about to say, Scott, that climate change really doesn't matter to her.
I'm just a unicorn from another planet. Climate change doesn't even hit my top 30 of how I vote for somebody, so I do think I am on this panel to say isn't what's selling me on you beating Trump, and I say that with respect. Mm-hmm. What's also not selling me on beating Trump is the new Green Deal, which all of the 2020 contenders have endorsed.
Mm-hmm. You know what would be nice is if an idiot like Meghan McCain could learn to say Green New Deal. It's not a new Green Deal because there's never been an old Green Deal. You know what I mean? Jesus.
Cost $93 trillion, or to every person in this room, $600,000 per each of your households. Do you think that plan, thank you, ma'am, is practical, or have you endorsed it, or do you have another option? Because when I hear that an average American is going to have to spend $600,000 for a new Green Deal, you can understand how people like me don't think that's logical.
And I hope she can understand how people like me think that she is a flippin' moron for believing a talking point like that.
Well, this is a lot like the death panels you heard about in Obamacare. Republicans talked about death panels. Yeah. We didn't have death panels, and we don't have $600,000 cost. Mm-hmm. This is a thing that I think has been helpful in our discussion in a variety of ways. Number one, we're talking about climate change. That is of value.
But
we're also talking about high ambition.
Could you give an example to just the average person in here, how they can help where it doesn't sound so irrational? I mean, we're talking about $51 trillion, the elimination of planes, the elimination of cows, a railway, no planes. I guess nobody can go to Hawaii anymore. It doesn't sound...
Jesus. I mean, Scott, is this just breathtakingly stupid?
Well, I'm sure there's more, so I'll hold my tongue for a moment.
Okay.
Not rational to me.
It isn't rational because those are the things that Donald Trump said. We are not going to eliminate cars. We are not going to eliminate trains. We're going to have what I have in my driveway today, which is a blue GM Bolt made in Michigan with American workers. That's what we're going to have, okay? We're going to have televisions powered by solar and wind energy. We're going to have potentially ways to fly airplanes on biofuels. We have flown a Boeing 737 across the Atlantic Ocean now, and biofuels developed in my state. The point is that when we think about our opportunities here, we can't be so narrow-minded. Look, you know, I grew up in the time of rotary phones, and now we got cell phones. We're going to have the greatest transformation of our economy that you can hardly imagine if we unleash this potential of America.
Can I just interject really quick?
Yeah.
I understand you're talking the talk and walking the walk, but a lot of advocates don't. Ocasio-Cortez's campaign spent $30,000 on...
Now, just hold on a damn minute, because she's got Jay Inslee, a real live, honest-to-God presidential candidate there.
Yeah.
But once again, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez lives rent-free in her head.
Well, she's the boogie woman,
and she's gonna channel her inner Rush Limbaugh in a second here. Just there's not much left of this.
All right.
1,050 Uber rides. Al Gore's home electricity was 21 times the national average in 2017, even after a green overhaul. Leonardo DiCaprio flies on private jets, including to accept an environmental award in 2016. A lot of environmentalists don't walk the walk, they just talk the talk, and then they want the average American to spend $600,000 in their household, and none of this adds up.
You just said that wasn't really true.
But that's what's proposed on the new Green Deal.
Actually, that is not what is proposed. Let's get this straight. That is not proposed in the new Green Deal, okay? I just want to be real straight about this.
And I guess, Governor, you've got no problems with voters then.
We don't.
And
let me...
I have to cut you off, sir. I hate to do it to you, but
I'll be back.
We have a time...
It was lovely. He took her to school. It was good. But the fact that she's even allowed to get away with that kind of crap gives you a pretty good idea, Scott, of where this campaign is going to be. Hint, in the gutter.
Well, but see, the thing is, Bob, if whoever the Democratic nominee is for 2020, it's got to be somebody who knows his or her stuff, who has a track record of doing right and doing good and doing well, pardon me, but who also will not simply sit back and take it when they spew their nonsense. See, they've been feeling around, grasping, if you will, for something, a new chant, something other than Benghazi, Benghazi, Benghazi. And I think it's coming to pass, if Meghan McCain is any indication, that AOC is the new Benghazi, Benghazi, Benghazi. Because these people are bought and paid for. They ought to be like NASCAR drivers with stickers all over their costume, their coveralls, their helmet, and their vehicle, as to who's taking care of handling the sponsorship, who's paying the freight. Okay, they have a vested interest on behalf of these corporate scum to naysay and contradict, and if all else fails, bullshit their way past any valid point that any Democratic candidate raises. And whoever the nominee is, they need to be able to dish it out just as fervently, but with a special distinction, that is, with reality-based reality woven in to the so-called talking points and the bullet points and stuff. You know, it's got to be somebody with a track record of doing right and doing good and doing well, somebody with hopefully executive experience, but beyond that, somebody who will not fall prey to the horse shit. And you know there will be horse shit. Every now and again, and it's not even horse shit, it's elephant shit. Every now and then, I post on my Facebook, usually on debate night, it's the side view of an elephant, and behind the elephant is a woman with a burlap bag into which the elephant is dropping GOP talking points. So we're going to see a lot of the elephant and that woman and her bag of shit in the next, in the next year and a half, because they are. It'll be not, and this will be one last thing to ruin the meal of somebody listening. They are these Republican talking points straight from the aft end of the elephant will be served. Light up that hot and fresh neon sign, kids, because that's where we're at. So I've probably done it for sure. Now I've
hot now. Right. All right, Scott, we're gonna get out of here, man.
All right, Bob, take care. And to all the fun lovers and truth seekers and Horn family congregation, I hope you took notes and jotted down the titles and the various things.
Go forth and make a pound cake.
Oh, I got to go to the store first. But it might be the way to spend, a lovely way to spend an evening.
All right, you take care, Scott.
All right, Bob, see ya.
Bye now. And so we're a little over time, but that's okay. So we'll come back at it, and we'll save some of today's morans for tomorrow, although that means that tomorrow's Titanic intellects will have to it gets so confusing. But I think we needed to have the conversation that we had, and I thank you for your patience in it. Given the goose egg that happened during the program, we will hope to raise $350 tomorrow, and we'll see what the day brings. In the meantime, I think we're going to be this may be one of those sleeping in 3 pairs of long johns kind of nights here, getting down into the single digits. will. In the meantime, thanks to all of you who do keep the program on the air. Thanks to all of our subscribers. Thanks to Catherine this evening. We didn't really have a goose egg because Catherine took it down by $50. Thank you, Catherine. And thank you, one and all, to everyone who shares their precious finite time engaging in this little conversation. Thanks to our all-volunteer staff. Thanks to Sparky and Steve. Thanks to our news ninjas. Thank you, Brother Deacon Asa at headon.live. Thank you, John Fox in Australia. Thank you, Ben Birch, whiterosesociety.org. Thanks to the hardest working, bravest people I know, the men and women of Coal River Mountain Watch, crmw.net, celebrating 20 years in the forefront of the struggle for human rights in Appalachia against the depredations of mountaintop removal coal extraction. And always, 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 Gina, it's all for you. Later, y'all.